In the annals of archaeological discovery, few events rival the profound impact of the Dead Sea Scrolls, uncovered between 1947 and 1956 in a series of 11 caves near the ancient settlement of Qumran. These fragile manuscripts, dating from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE, represent a library unlike any other. They are a direct window into the vibrant, tumultuous world of Second Temple Judaism, a period that witnessed the birth of both Rabbinic Judaism and, crucially, early Christianity. Part 1. The Accidental Revelation. Approximately 25 minutes. Chapter 1. A Shepherd's Stone and a Shattered Jar. 7 minutes. Our story begins not in a grand archaeological expedition, meticulously planned and funded, but with the raw, untamed spirit of the Judean desert and the simple act of a young Bedouin shepherd. Muhammad Evdib, barely a man, was searching for a lost goat in the rugged cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea. It was late 1946 or early 1947 when Muhammad, along with his cousin Jumia Muhammad and Khalil Musa, stumbled upon a small, unassuming cave opening. A tossed stone, intended to coax a stray animal, produced an unexpected, hollow crack. The sound of pottery shattering in the darkness. This singular, almost mundane event would irrevocably alter our understanding of ancient history and faith. To camera, it's a romanticized origin story, and rightly so, because it speaks to the profound serendipity at the heart of this discovery. This wasn't a planned archaeological dig, driven by hypotheses and systematic excavation. It was pure chance, a moment of accidental revelation. And the initial reaction, even from the Bedouin, was one of confusion, perhaps even disappointment. They didn't immediately grasp the immense historical and religious significance of what they held in their hands. They were looking for gold, not ancient parchments. Chapter 2. From Desert Caves to Bethlehem Bazaars. 10 minutes. The initial 7 scrolls found in what would become known as Cave 1 included monumental texts: the Great Isaiah Scroll, a near-complete copy of the biblical book; the Habakkuk Commentary, a unique sectarian interpretation; and the Community Rule, outlining the life of an ancient community. Yet, their true value remained unrecognized. The Bedouin, seeking attempted to sell them. Their RST stop was a dealer in Bethlehem, Ibrahim Ijha, who, fearing they were stolen from a synagogue, dismissed them as worthless. Undeterred, they approached Khalil Iskander Shehin, better known as Kando, a cobbler and part-time antiques dealer in Bethlehem. Kando, recognizing their potential, acquired 3 of the scrolls. The remaining 3 were sold to another dealer. The scrolls then embarked on a clandestine journey. 3 of them made their way to Mar Samuel, the metropolitan of the Syrian Orthodox Church in Jerusalem. A man of foresight, he quickly understood their potential importance and began seeking authentication, albeit discreetly. Simultaneously, Professor Eliezer Lepasuknik of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem also became aware of the scrolls through another dealer. In a dramatic turn of events in November 1947, just as the United Nations voted to partition Palestine, Suknik secretly arranged to purchase 3 scrolls from the dealer, glimpsing a fragment through a barbed wire fence in Jerusalem's military zone B. This period of intense political upheaval, culminating in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, added an incredible layer of tension and urgency to these transactions. The scrolls were literally changing hands amidst their fate hanging in the balance. The political climate of 1947 to 1948, with the impending end of the British Mandate and the outbreak of the Arab-Israeli War, added an incredible layer of tension and urgency to these transactions. The scrolls were literally changing hands amidst their fate intertwined with the birth of a nation. This chaotic backdrop makes the eventual recovery and study of these documents all the more miraculous. Imagine the courage it took for Suknik to meet a dealer in a war-torn zone, risking his life to acquire what he instinctively knew were priceless historical artifacts. This wasn't merely an academic pursuit. It was a race against time and destruction, a desperate attempt to salvage a piece of humanity's past amidst present turmoil. The fragmented nature of the initial sales also meant that for a time, the scrolls were dispersed, their full significance obscured until scholars could bring them together. Chapter 3. The race for authentication and discovery. 15 minutes. In February 1948, a pivotal moment arrived when Mar Samuel's assistant contacted the American School of Oriental Research. John C. Trevor, the acting director, a brilliant young scholar and photographer, invited them to bring the scrolls for examination. Trevor, recognizing their immense antiquity, took detailed pictures of the scrolls and sent copies to the renowned American scholar William F. Albright. Albright, in a telegram that would become legendary, authenticated the scrolls, dating them to around 100 BCE. This made them 1,000 years older than any previously known Hebrew biblical manuscripts, a revelation that ignited a global scholarly frenzy. 1. Trevor's meticulous photography, undertaken with limited resources, proved instrumental in disseminating the discovery and securing its initial academic validation. His foresight in documenting the scrolls before their full conservation was a critical step in their preservation and study. This initial discovery in Cave 1 was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the next decade, systematic searches by archaeologists like Per Roland de Vaux and G. Lancaster Harding, alongside Bedouin explorers, led to the discovery of 10 more caves containing thousands of additional fragments. 1. Cave 4, discovered in August 1952, proved to be the most prolific, yielding approximately 90% of all the scroll fragments, a veritable treasure trove of ancient texts. 1. These discoveries continued until 1956, uncovering a vast ancient library that would forever change our understanding of biblical history and early Judaism. The archaeological excavations at Qumran, led by explorers like Per de Vaux, were crucial in establishing the context of the scrolls, linking them to the ancient settlement and its inhabitants. The competition between Shile archaeologists and Bedouin treasure hunters, though sometimes fraught, ultimately led to the recovery of an unparalleled collection of ancient manuscripts. The sheer volume of material was staggering. It wasn't just a few isolated texts. It was an entire library, airing an unprecedented window into a pivotal period of religious history. The challenge then shifted from discovery to preservation, assembly, and interpretation, a monumental task that continues to this day. Imagine the painstaking work of piecing together tens of thousands of fragments, like a giant, ancient jigsaw puzzle, each piece holding a whisper from the past. The archaeological findings at Qumran, including the settlement's layout, its water systems, and its cemeteries, provided invaluable context, suggesting a highly organized, communal existence. This integration of textual and archaeological evidence allowed scholars to begin reconstructing the lives and beliefs of the community responsible for these extraordinary texts. Part 2. Unveiling the Ancient Library. Contents and Context. Approximately 70 minutes. Chapter 4. What the Scrolls Contain. A Tripartite Classy. Cation. 20 minutes. The Dead Sea Scrolls comprise a staggering collection of 981 errant manuscripts, painstakingly pieced together from tens of thousands of fragments. 2. These texts are primarily written on parchment, animal skin, some on papyrus, and one unique scroll on copper. 2. They are predominantly in Hebrew, with significant portions in Aramaic, and a smaller number in Greek. 2. Scholars have broadly categorized their contents into 3 main groups, each airing unique insights into Second Temple Judaism. This classy cation is not merely an academic exercise. It is fundamental to understanding the diverse religious landscape of the period and the theological concerns of the Qumran community. The sheer volume and variety of these texts underscore the intellectual vibrancy and textual productivity of ancient Judaism. Roughly 40% of the scrolls are copies of texts from the Hebrew Scriptures, what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. This includes every book of the Hebrew Bible except for the Book of Esther. The significance here is immense. These are the oldest surviving manuscripts of these biblical books, predating previously known complete texts by over 1,000 years. 2. They allow us to examine the textual history of the Bible with unparalleled depth, revealing the incredible fidelity of transmission over centuries. For instance, the Great Isaiah Scroll, nearly complete, shows remarkable consistency with the Masoretic text, the standard Hebrew Bible text. Despite a millennium of separation, this provides powerful evidence for the meticulous scribal traditions of ancient Judaism. However, it also reveals minor textual variants, which are invaluable for textual critics in reconstructing the earliest forms of biblical texts. These variations, though often minor, can sometimes shed light on errant interpretive traditions or scribal practices. The scrolls, therefore, serve as a critical anchor in the study of biblical transmission, airing both confirmation and new avenues for exploration. These biblical manuscripts are not merely ancient curiosities. They are foundational. They provide crucial evidence for the textual stability of the Hebrew Bible, demonstrating that the texts we read today are remarkably similar to those used by Jewish communities 2 millennia ago. This offers profound reassurance to believers and invaluable data for textual critics. The presence of multiple copies of certain biblical books, such as Deuteronomy and Psalms, allows scholars to compare errant versions and trace their lineage. Airing insights into the dynamic process of canon formation and textual evolution within ancient Judaism. The Dead Sea Scrolls have, in essence, pushed back the clock on biblical studies, giving us a clearer, earlier snapshot of the sacred texts that shaped Western civilization. Chapter 5. Beyond the Canon, Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha. 20 minutes. Another 30% of the scrolls consist of apocryphal and pseudepigraphical texts. These are religious writings from the Second Temple period that were widely read and influential but ultimately not included in the biblical canon of either Judaism or most Christian traditions. 2. Books like Enoch, Jubilees, and Tobit are fascinating glimpses into the diverse theological landscape of the era. They present narratives, laws, and wisdom literature that, while not canonical, shaped the worldview of many Jews at the time, including potentially the early followers of Jesus. The sheer number of these non-canonical texts found at Qumran indicates their immense popularity and significance within certain Jewish circles, challenging the notion of a monolithic Judaism in the centuries leading up to the Common Era. These texts are crucial for understanding the broader intellectual and spiritual currents of the period. They show us that the Judaism of Jesus' time was not monolithic but a rich tapestry of beliefs, interpretations, and spiritual expressions. Many of the ideas and concepts found in these non-canonical texts, such as detailed angelology, apocalyptic visions, and expanded narratives of biblical figures, would have been familiar to Jesus and his early followers, forming part of their shared cultural and religious vocabulary. For example, the Book of Jubilees reinterprets Genesis and Exodus, expanding on biblical narratives and introducing new legal material, often with a strong emphasis on a solar calendar, which erred from the lunar calendar used by the Jerusalem temple establishment. This errance in calendrical practice is a significant indicator of sectarian divergence and highlights the Qumran community's distinct identity. The Book of Tobit, a wisdom tale, offers moral instruction and insights into Jewish piety, showcasing the ethical concerns prevalent at the time. For example, the Book of Enoch, a prominent text among the scrolls, delves into the origins of evil, the nature of angels, and intricate eschatological prophecies. While not in the Hebrew canon, its influence on early Jewish and Christian thought is undeniable, with references and allusions appearing in the New Testament, particularly in the Epistle of Jude. The Enochic literature, with its elaborate cosmology and demonology, provided a framework for understanding the forces of good and evil, a concept that would later be profoundly influential in the development of Christian theology. The presence of multiple copies of Enoch at Qumran underscores its importance to the community, suggesting it was a foundational text for their worldview and their understanding of divine judgment and the end times. These texts, though often overlooked in modern biblical studies, are essential for grasping the full intellectual and spiritual context of early Christianity. Chapter 6. The Sectarian Voice, Unveiling the Qumran Community. 30 minutes. Perhaps the most revolutionary 30% of the scrolls are the sectarian manuscripts, previously unknown documents unique to the community that produced them. 2. These texts are an intimate, first-hand account of the rules, beliefs, and daily life of a specific Jewish group, widely believed to be the Essenes, who resided at Qumran. 2. Documents like the Community Rule, the War Scroll, and the Pesharim, commentaries on biblical books, paint a vivid picture of a community intensely focused on purity, righteousness, and apocalyptic expectations. These texts are not merely historical records. They are the living testament of a group that saw itself as the true Israel, living in anticipation of God's imminent intervention in history. They provide an unparalleled window into the inner workings of a sectarian movement during a pivotal period. The Community Rule, for instance, outlines the strict regulations for communal life, including initiation rituals, communal meals, and disciplinary procedures. It reveals a highly structured, almost monastic society dedicated to a rigorous interpretation of Jewish law and ritual purity. 4. This document, also known as the Manual of Discipline, 1QS, details the process for new members to join the community, which involved a 2-year probationary period, oaths of allegiance, and a careful assessment of their spiritual maturity. It prescribed a life of humility, truthfulness, and communal sharing, where individual property was often surrendered to the community. The emphasis on internal discipline and mutual accountability was paramount, creating a tightly knit group bound by shared ideals and practices. The rules governing their interactions, from speaking in turn to the resolution of disputes, paint a picture of a society striving for perfect harmony and righteousness in anticipation of divine intervention. The very act of copying and studying these rules reinforced their commitment and identity. The War Scroll, 1QM, on the other hand, describes an apocalyptic battle between the sons of light, the Qumran community and divine forces, and the sons of darkness, their enemies, often identified with the Romans and corrupt Jewish leadership. 4. This is not merely a metaphorical battle. It is a detailed military manual, outlining troop formations, weaponry, and battle cries for a literal, cosmic war at the end of days. The scroll provides a chillingly precise vision of an eschatological acting the community's fervent belief in an imminent divine judgment and their role as God's chosen warriors. It speaks volumes about their intense apocalyptic expectations and their conviction that they were living in the epic of human history, preparing for the ultimate triumph of good over evil. The vivid imagery and detailed instructions suggest a deep-seated hope for vindication and the establishment of God's eternal kingdom. The Pesharim, commentaries on biblical books, are unique interpretations of biblical prophecies, applying them directly to the events and gurus of their own time, often featuring a mysterious guru known as the teacher of righteousness. 4. These commentaries are not academic exercises but urgent, living interpretations, revealing how the Qumran community saw themselves as the full element of ancient prophecies. They believed that God had revealed the true meaning of these prophecies only to their teacher of righteousness, allowing them to decipher the signs of the times. This exclusive access to divine understanding further solidified their identity as a chosen remnant, set apart from the rest of Israel. The Pesharim demonstrated dynamic engagement with Scripture, where the past, present, and future were intricately woven together through prophetic interpretation. They saw their own erring and separation as part of God's divine plan, leading to a glorious future. These sectarian texts are our direct window into the minds of the people who lived at Qumran. They reveal a group deeply concerned with the end times, with divine judgment, and with living a life of absolute purity in anticipation of God's intervention in history. Their worldview, their vocabulary, and their hopes would have been part of the broader Jewish landscape that early Christianity emerged from. They show us a group that believed they were living out the prophecies, embodying the true Israel, and preparing the way for the Messiah. Their meticulous adherence to purity laws, their communal meals, and their shared study of Scripture were all aspects of their preparation for the coming kingdom. They were not just waiting passively. They were actively shaping their lives to align with what they believed was God's will for the end times. This intense spiritual discipline and sense of purpose are palpable in every line of these unique documents. The archaeological evidence, from the ritual baths, mikveh, to the communal dining hall, corroborates the textual descriptions, painting a holistic picture of their dedicated existence. This commitment to a rigorous, communal life, driven by eschatological fervor, provides a fascinating parallel and contrast to the early Christian communities. Part 3. The Qumran Community, Essens and Their World. Approximately 60 minutes. Chapter 7. Who were the Essens? 20 minutes. For decades, the prevailing scholarly consensus has identified the Qumran community with the Essenes, a Jewish ascetic sect described by ancient historians such as Josephus, Philo, and Pliny the Elder. 2. These writers portray the Essenes as a mystic Jewish community, flourishing from the 2nd century BCE to the 1st century CE, characterized by a communal lifestyle, strict adherence to Jewish law, ritual purity, and a dualistic worldview. 4. The writings of these ancient authors provide invaluable external corroboration for the internal evidence found in the scrolls, helping to paint a more complete picture of this enigmatic group. However, it's important to note that these external accounts, while informative, were often written from an outsider's perspective and may not fully capture the nuances of the Essene self-understanding. Josephus, in particular, provides a detailed account, noting their celibacy, though some groups married, absence of personal property, communal meals, daily ritual immersion, and devotion to charity. 4. His accounts, found primarily in the Jewish War and Antiquities of the Jews, describe a highly disciplined society, almost monastic in its structure, where members renounced personal wealth and lived in strict adherence to their communal rules. Philo of Alexandria, a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher, also describes the Essenes in his work Quod omnis probis liber sit, emphasizing their philosophical and ethical rigor, their communal property, and their rejection of slavery and warfare. Pliny the Elder, a Roman naturalist, even places them geographically above the town of Engida on the west side of the Dead Sea, a location consistent with Qumran. 4. This strong correlation between the descriptions of the Essenes and the archaeological findings at Qumran, including the isolated settlement, communal dining halls, and numerous ritual baths, mikvahot, forms the bedrock of the Essene hypothesis. Their emphasis on ritual purity, communal ownership, and a disciplined life set them apart from other Jewish groups like the Pharisees and Sadducees. They saw themselves as the true Israel, preparing for the coming of God's kingdom. This intense focus on purity and eschatology is a recurring theme that resonates deeply with the scrolls themselves. The meticulous planning of the Qumran settlement, from its sophisticated water system to its communal refectory, speaks volumes about their commitment to this way of life. It's vital to understand that the Essenes, particularly the Qumran community, were a sectarian movement. They believed they were living in the end times, that the temple priesthood was illegitimate, and that true worship involved rigorous adherence to purity laws and communal study of the Torah. This sense of being a chosen remnant, living in anticipation of God's imminent intervention, deeply informed their worldview and practices. They were not just a philosophical school. They were a community living out their convictions in radical separation from mainstream society. Their withdrawal from the perceived corruption of Jerusalem and the temple establishment was a deliberate act of spiritual protest, a commitment to living a life of unblemished holiness. This separation was not merely physical. It was ideological, theological, and ritualistic. They believed their community was the true sanctuary, a spiritual temple, where God's presence resided amongst the pure. This radical self-understanding is a key to unlocking their motivations and the content of their unique writings. The Essenes were not a monolithic group. Historical sources hint at variations within the movement. Josephus mentions an order of Essenes that permitted marriage and family life, suggesting a spectrum of adherence to their core tenets. 4. However, the Qumran community appears to have represented the most austere and separatist branch, dedicated to a celibate, communal existence in the desert, away from what they considered the corrupt temple establishment in Jerusalem. This diversity within the broader Essene movement adds another layer of complexity to our understanding. It reminds us that even within a seemingly uniform group, there were errant interpretations and practices, acting the dynamic nature of religious movements in antiquity. The Qumran community's choice for a desert asceticism was a distinct, radical path, chosen by those who sought the highest levels of purity and devotion. Chapter 8. Daily Life and Rituals at Qumran, 20 minutes. Life at Qumran, as reconstructed from archaeological evidence and the sectarian scrolls, was austere and highly structured. The community engaged in daily rituals of purification, immersing themselves in the numerous mikvahot found at the site. 4. These ritual baths, far more numerous and elaborate than typically found in settlements of comparable size, underscore the Essenes' profound obsession with ritual purity. Each day, Before communal meals and prayer, members would purify themselves, symbolizing their separation from the perceived impurity of the outside world. This constant cycle of immersion was not merely a physical cleansing but a spiritual renewal, a daily reaffirmation of their covenant with God and their commitment to holiness. The sheer number of mikvahs at Qumran, including one large enough for communal use, suggests that these immersions were a central and frequent part of their daily routine, far exceeding the requirements of mainstream Judaism. Their days were likely divided between manual labor, tending elds, pottery production, and maintaining the complex water system that brought precious water from distant springs, communal meals, and intense study of scripture. The presence of a scriptorium, a room with inkwells and plastered tables, strongly suggests that the community was actively involved in copying and composing the very manuscripts found in the caves. 4. This dedication to textual production highlights their commitment to preserving and interpreting sacred texts. Seeing themselves as guardians of divine knowledge, the communal meals were not just about physical sustenance. They were sacred events, almost liturgical, where members partook of food in a state of ritual purity, symbolizing their unity and their shared spiritual journey. These meals were often preceded by blessings and prayers, reinforcing their deep piety and their sense of being a holy congregation. The archaeological evidence of a large dining hall and adjacent pantry, lead with thousands of pottery vessels, further supports the description of these communal gatherings. The communal meals were not just about sustenance. They were sacred events, almost liturgical. Josephus describes them as resembling holy rites, preceded by prayer and strict rules of conduct. This communal aspect, along with their strict moral code and emphasis on spiritual discipline, has often drawn comparisons to early Christian monasticism and even the early Christian agape feasts. It speaks to a profound desire for spiritual communion and shared identity. The Essenes' communal living was a radical departure from the typical family-centric structure of ancient Jewish society, acting their belief that true family was found within the community of the elect. This deliberate choice to live apart and share all things in common was a powerful statement of their commitment to an alternative vision of society, one based on purity, equality, and devotion to God's law. Their daily life was a living embodiment of their theological convictions, a constant striving for perfection in anticipation of the coming kingdom. Furthermore, the scrolls reveal a community that practiced a form of communal ownership, where individual possessions were largely eschewed in favor of shared resources. 4. This economic model, combined with their disciplined life, fostered a strong sense of unity and shared purpose, distinguishing them from much of mainstream Jewish society and acting their radical commitment to their ideals. Their emphasis on humility, self-control, and mutual support created a cohesive social structure designed to facilitate spiritual growth and communal harmony. The archaeological record, with its evidence of shared facilities and a lack of individual opulent dwellings, aligns perfectly with the textual descriptions of their communal economic practices. This radical economic model was not just practical. It was deeply theological, acting their belief in the temporary nature of earthly possessions and the eternal value of spiritual community. They were, in essence, building a microcosm of the heavenly kingdom on earth. Chapter 9. The Teacher of Righteousness and Messianic Expectations. 20 minutes. Central to the Qumran community's identity and theology was the guru of the Teacher of Righteousness. This enigmatic leader, whose true identity remains unknown, is portrayed in the scrolls as a priestly guru who received divine revelation and guided the community through a period of apostasy and persecution. 4. He was seen as the legitimate interpreter of the Torah, in contrast to the wicked priest and other adversaries, often identified with the Hasmonean high priests whom the Qumran community viewed as corrupt and illegitimate. 4. The teacher was not merely a charismatic leader but a divinely appointed prophet, whose teachings were considered authoritative and whose insights into Scripture were unparalleled. His role was crucial in shaping the community's self-understanding and their interpretation of history and prophecy. The Teacher of Righteousness is a fascinating guru because he embodies the community's struggle for authenticity and their belief in a divinely appointed leader. He was not just a historical guru but a prophetic one, whose teachings were considered authoritative and whose erring was seen as redemptive. His followers believed he was the one who truly understood God's law and would prepare them for the coming judgment. This Gur provided both spiritual guidance and a rallying point for a community that felt alienated from the religious establishment. The conflict between the teacher and the wicked priest is a central narrative in many sectarian scrolls, acting the Qumran community's deep disillusionment with the contemporary Jewish leadership. This conflict was not merely personal. It was a cosmic struggle between truth and falsehood, righteousness and corruption. The teacher's erring and eventual vindication were seen as integral to God's plan for the end times, airing a powerful message of hope and perseverance to his followers. The Qumran community harbored intense messianic expectations, anticipating the arrival of not one, but often two messiahs, a priestly messiah, from the line of Aaron, and a royal messiah, from the line of Israel. 2. This dual messianic hope, along with their belief in an imminent apocalyptic battle, underscores their fervent anticipation of God's intervention in history and the establishment of a new covenant. They believed they were living in the final days, and their rigorous lifestyle was a preparation for this cosmic event, a grand climax to human history. The concept of a priestly Messiah, often overlooked in mainstream Jewish thought, highlights the Qumran community's emphasis on the purity of the priesthood and the restoration of a legitimate temple service. The royal Messiah, a more traditional Gur, was expected to lead Israel in a victorious war against its enemies and establish an eternal kingdom. These detailed messianic expectations, articulated across various scrolls, provide a rich tapestry of eschatological thought that was circulating in the Second Temple period, demonstrating the diverse ways in which Jews anticipated God's future redemption. Their apocalyptic worldview was not a fringe belief but a deeply held conviction that shaped every aspect of their communal and individual lives. Their messianic hopes, while distinct from Christian beliefs about Jesus, provide a crucial framework for understanding the broader messianic fervor of the Second Temple period. It shows us that the expectation for a divine deliverer was widespread and multifaceted, not a singular, uniform belief. The scrolls reveal a rich tapestry of messianic thought that was circulating at the time of Jesus, demonstrating that messianic longing was a powerful force in Jewish society. The Qumran community's messianic vision, with its dual Gurs and emphasis on a cosmic war, stands as a testament to the diverse and dynamic nature of Jewish eschatology. Understanding these nuances helps us appreciate the unique claims of early Christianity within its broader Jewish context, highlighting both points of continuity and significant divergence. It prevents us from anachronistically imposing later Christian doctrines onto earlier Jewish beliefs and allows for a more accurate historical and theological understanding. The scrolls, therefore, serve as a vital bridge, connecting us to the complex spiritual landscape that gave birth to both Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity. Part 4. The Scrolls and Christian Origins, Nuance and Connections. Approximately 80 minutes. Chapter 10. Debunking Sensationalism. What the Scrolls Don't Say. 20 minutes. From the moment of their discovery, the Dead Sea Scrolls ignited intense speculation about their relationship to Christianity. Early sensationalist theories, often fueled by Gurs like John Marco Allegro, suggested that the scrolls contained direct references to Jesus or early Christian Gurs, or even that they revealed a conspiracy to suppress the true origins of Christianity. 2. These claims, while captivating, ultimately lacked concrete evidence and were often based on misinterpretations or deliberate distortions, driven more by popular imagination than scholarly rigor. The allure of a hidden truth, a suppressed history, proved irresistible to many, leading to numerous books and documentaries that promised to unveil the real story of Christian origins through the scrolls. However, serious scholarship has consistently refuted these sensational claims, emphasizing the Jewish context of the texts. It's important to state clearly, there is no mention of Jesus, Peter, Paul, or any early Christian Gurs in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Nor are there any texts that can be definitively identified as early Christian writings. The scrolls are unequivocally Jewish documents, reflecting the diverse currents within Judaism before and during the time of Jesus. Any claims to the contrary are simply not supported by the textual evidence. To suggest otherwise is to impose a narrative onto the texts that they simply do not bear. The scrolls are not a gospel or a hidden archive of early Christian teachings. They are, however, an invaluable resource for understanding the rich and complex Jewish world from which Christianity emerged. This distinction is crucial for an accurate historical understanding, allowing the scrolls to speak for themselves rather than forcing them into a preconceived narrative. The scholarly consensus is overwhelming on this point, despite persistent popular misconceptions. The absence of Christian gores or doctrines is not a sign of suppression, but simply a reaction of the scrolls' origin within a distinct Jewish sectarian movement that predates or is contemporary with the earliest stages of Christianity. The scrolls do not owe a secret gospel or a lost chapter of Christian history in the way some popular narratives have suggested. Their value for understanding Christian origins lies not in direct references, but in providing an indispensable historical and religious context. They show us the rich soil from which early Christianity sprang. Rather than revealing a hidden seed, they illuminate the intellectual and spiritual landscape that Jesus and his followers inhabited. By understanding the various forms of Judaism present in the Second Temple period, including the beliefs and practices of groups like the Qumran community, we gain a much deeper appreciation for the unique message and innovations of early Christianity. The scrolls help us to see what was common and what was distinctive about the teachings of Jesus and the apostles, allowing for a more nuanced and historically grounded interpretation of the New Testament. They provide the missing pieces to a much larger puzzle, not by airing direct answers about Jesus, but by painting a vivid picture of the world he lived in. Chapter 11. The Jewish Milieu of Early Christianity, 30 minutes. Despite the absence of direct Christian references, the Dead Sea Scrolls are invaluable for illuminating the Jewish milieu from which Christianity emerged. They reveal a world brimming with messianic fervor, apocalyptic expectations, and intense debates over the interpretation of Scripture, a world that shaped the very language and concepts of the New Testament. 2. The scrolls provide a vibrant backdrop against which to read the Gospels and Pauline epistles, helping us to understand the cultural and religious assumptions of the earliest Christians. This is not about Christianity in the scrolls, but about understanding the context of the scrolls that informed early Christian thought. It's about recognizing the shared vocabulary, the common theological concerns, and the parallel spiritual aspirations that existed within various Jewish groups during this pivotal era. Consider the linguistic and conceptual parallels. The Qumran texts frequently employ terms like sons of light and sons of darkness, a dualistic worldview that echoes in the Gospel of John and Pauline epistles. 2. This dualism, which posits a cosmic struggle between forces of good and evil, light and darkness, was a pervasive theme in Second Temple Judaism, and the scrolls demonstrate its profound influence on the Qumran community. Similarly, the concept of a new covenant, central to Christian theology, also appears in the Damascus document from Qumran, though with a different understanding. In Qumran, the New Covenant was understood as a renewed commitment to the Torah by the faithful remnant, while in Christianity, it became associated with the sacrifice of Jesus and the establishment of a new spiritual relationship with God. 2. The emphasis on righteousness, purity, and communal living, so prominent in the Qumran texts, resonates with the teachings of Jesus and the practices of the early Jerusalem church, such as the communal sharing of possessions described in the Book of Acts. 2. These are not coincidences but reactions of a shared cultural and religious heritage. The scrolls provide concrete evidence that many of the theological concepts and ethical imperatives that would later define Christianity were already deeply embedded within the broader Jewish religious landscape. This demonstrates that early Christianity did not emerge in a vacuum but was deeply rooted in its Jewish heritage, drawing upon existing traditions and reinterpreting them in light of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. These parallels don't suggest direct borrowing or a secret connection, but rather a shared intellectual and spiritual landscape. Jesus and his followers were Jews, steeped in the traditions and expectations of Second Temple Judaism. The scrolls help us understand the nuances of that landscape, making the New Testament's message even richer and more historically grounded. They demonstrate that many of the ideas that later became central to Christianity were already circulating within various Jewish groups, providing a deeper understanding of the theological evolution. For instance, the Qumran community's emphasis on a righteous remnant, separate from the perceived corruption of the world, NVS and echo in early Christian communities who also saw themselves as a distinct people called to holiness. The scrolls also highlight the diversity of messianic expectations in Jesus' time, showing that there was no single, universally accepted understanding of the Messiah. This context is vital for appreciating how revolutionary Jesus' claims were and how they both led and challenged existing Jewish hopes. The scrolls, therefore, serve as a vital bridge, connecting us to the complex spiritual landscape that gave birth to both Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity, allowing us to trace the intellectual and spiritual lineage of both traditions. Chapter 12. John the Baptist and the Qumran Connection, 30 minutes. One of the most intriguing, yet debated, connections between the Dead Sea Scrolls and early Christianity revolves around the guru of John the Baptist, his ascetic lifestyle, his ministry in the Judean wilderness near Qumran, and his emphasis on repentance and baptism have led many scholars to speculate about a potential link between John and the Qumran community. The Gospels describe John as living in the desert, wearing camel's hair and eating locusts and wild honey, a lifestyle that aligns with the ascetic tendencies of the Qumran Essenes. Furthermore, his practice of ritual immersion for the forgiveness of sins, while distinct in its purpose, shares a superficial resemblance to the frequent ritual baths, mikvahot, practiced by the Qumran community. This geographical proximity and shared emphasis on wilderness living and ritual purity have fueled theories of a direct connection, with some suggesting John may have even been a former member of the Qumran community. While the idea of John the Baptist having connections to Qumran is certainly captivating, it's crucial to approach this with scholarly caution. There's no direct evidence in the scrolls or in the New Testament to confirm that John was an Essene or that he was directly influenced by the Qumran community. However, the parallels are striking enough to warrant serious consideration. Both John and the Qumran community were deeply concerned with repentance, purity, and the imminent arrival of God's judgment. Both operated outside the mainstream temple establishment, viewing it as corrupt. John's call to repentance and his baptism in the Jordan River, while having roots in broader Jewish purification rituals, also carried a distinct eschatological urgency, preparing people for the coming Messiah. The Qumran community, with its emphasis on ritual purity and preparation for the end times, would have been a familiar, if distinct, part of the religious landscape that shaped John. It's plausible that John was aware of, and perhaps even influenced by, the broader ascetic and eschatological movements in the Judean wilderness, of which Qumran was a prominent example, without being a formal member. However, differences exist. John's baptism was a singular, unrepeatable act of repentance for the forgiveness of sins, a public declaration of a new spiritual commitment. The Qumran immersions, on the other hand, were frequent, often daily, rituals of purification from impurity, not necessarily for the forgiveness of sins in the same way. Furthermore, John preached to all who would listen, regardless of their background, calling them to repentance. The Qumran community was an exclusive, separatist group, with a rigorous initiation process. John's message was universal. The Qumran message was sectarian. These distinctions are crucial. While both gurus operated within a similar geographical and theological landscape, their missions and methods ultimately diverged, reflecting different understandings of God's plan and humanity's role within it. The scrolls help us to appreciate these subtle yet profound differences, preventing us from drawing overly simplistic conclusions about directing whence. The Dead Sea Scrolls, by providing such a rich tapestry of Second Temple Judaism, allow us to place John the Baptist more accurately within his historical context. We see that his message, while unique, was not entirely alien to the religious currents of his time. He was a prophet in a land ripe with prophetic expectation, a voice crying in a wilderness that was already home to other seekers of purity and righteousness. The scrolls don't diminish John's originality but rather highlight it, showing how he drew upon existing traditions while forging a new path, preparing the way for a Messiah whose message would transcend the boundaries of any single sect or community. The very fact that we can even ask these questions and explore these nuances is a testament to the profound impact of the Dead Sea Scrolls on our understanding of early Christian origins. They force us to engage with the complexities of history, rather than relying on anachronistic assumptions. Chapter 13. Shared themes and divergent paths, 20 minutes. Beyond John the Baptist, the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal numerous shared theological themes and concepts with early Christian thought, while simultaneously highlighting crucial divergences. Both the Qumran community and early Christians emphasized themes such as the importance of righteousness, the concept of a new covenant, the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, and the expectation of a coming judgment and a new age. These shared themes demonstrate a common spiritual vocabulary and a shared heritage within Second Temple Judaism. The scrolls illuminate the fertile ground from which both movements sprang, showing how they drew upon a common well of prophetic and apocalyptic traditions. For instance, the Qumran community's concept of the Spirit of Holiness, or Holy Spirit, is strikingly similar to the New Testament's understanding of the Holy Spirit, particularly in its role in purification, discernment, and empowering the community. Both traditions saw the Spirit as an internal force guiding believers to righteousness and enabling them to fulfill God's will. However, the Christian understanding of the Holy Spirit, particularly after Pentecost, emphasizes a more personal, indwelling presence and a universal outpouring that transcends sectarian boundaries. Similarly, while both groups anticipated a new covenant, the Qumran community's new covenant was primarily a renewed commitment to the Mosaic law by a faithful remnant, while for early Christians, the new covenant was inaugurated by the blood of Jesus, establishing a new relationship with God based on grace and faith, open to all, Jew and Gentile alike. These subtle but profound differences are key to understanding the unique theological developments of early Christianity. These comparisons are not about proving one tradition is superior to the other, but about understanding the dynamic religious landscape of the Second Temple period. The scrolls show us that many of the theological building blocks that Jesus and his followers used were already present and being debated within Judaism. Christianity didn't emerge ex nihilo. It was deeply embedded in its Jewish context. The genius of early Christianity was not in inventing entirely new concepts, but in reinterpreting existing ones through the lens of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. This process of reinterpretation led to both continuity and radical discontinuity with existing Jewish traditions. The scrolls provide the essential backdrop for appreciating this complex interplay, allowing us to see how early Christians engaged with RMED and sometimes transformed the religious ideas of their time. This nuanced perspective enriches our understanding of both traditions, highlighting their shared roots while respecting their distinct identities. Chapter 14. The Scrolls and the Canon, Textual Transmission and Authority, 20 minutes. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls revolutionized biblical textual criticism. Before Qumran, the oldest complete Hebrew manuscripts of the Old Testament dated to the 9th and 10th centuries CE, the Masoretic text. The scrolls provided texts 1,000 years older, offering an unprecedented opportunity to examine the textual transmission of the Hebrew Bible. What they revealed was both reassuring and complex. For many books, the textual fidelity was remarkable, demonstrating the meticulous care of ancient scribes. For others, particularly Jeremiah and Samuel, significant variations were found, suggesting a more fluid textual tradition in the Second Temple period than previously imagined. The scrolls confirmed the overall reliability of the Masoretic text, which is a huge reassurance for biblical scholars and believers. But they also introduced us to a greater textual diversity. We now know that there wasn't just one single, universally accepted text of the Hebrew Bible in the Second Temple period. There were different textual traditions, or recensions, circulating. This doesn't undermine the authority of the Bible. Rather, it enriches our understanding of its formation and transmission. It shows a living, dynamic process of sacred text preservation, where different communities might have had slightly different versions of the same inspired writings. This complexity challenges simplistic notions of a perfectly static text and invites a deeper appreciation for the human element in the divine human process of Scripture. This textual diversity is particularly evident in books like Jeremiah, where the Qumran texts, for example, 4Q often align more closely with the Greek Septuagint than with the later Masoretic text, suggesting that the Septuagint was translated from a Hebrew text type different from, and in some cases older than, the one that became dominant. Similarly, The books of Samuel from Qumran, for example, 4 Kisama, show significant variations that often correspond with readings found in the Septuagint and Josephus, providing crucial evidence for reconstructing the earliest forms of these narratives. These findings have led scholars to re-evaluate the history of the Hebrew Bible, moving away from a linear model of transmission to a more complex understanding of multiple textual streams existing concurrently. The scrolls, therefore, are not just ancient documents. They are primary sources for understanding the very foundation of the biblical canon and the processes by which these sacred texts were preserved and transmitted across generations. Chapter 15, Apocalypticism and Eschatology, a Shared Horizon. 20 minutes. Both the Qumran community and early Christianity were deeply steeped in apocalyptic and eschatological thought. The scrolls, particularly sectarian texts like the War Scroll, the Community Rule, and various prophetic commentaries, Pesharim, reveal a profound preoccupation with the end times, divine judgment, and the imminent arrival of God's kingdom. This worldview was characterized by a sharp dualism, dividing the world into forces of light and darkness, good and evil, and anticipating a climactic cosmic battle that would usher in a new age. This intense expectation of God's intervention in history was not unique to Qumran. It was a pervasive feature of Second Temple Judaism, forming the very air that early Christians breathed. When we read the New Testament, especially the Gospels and Revelation, we encounter a world saturated with apocalyptic language and eschatological urgency. Jesus' teachings about the kingdom of God, his parables, and his prophecies of the end times are deeply rooted in this apocalyptic tradition. The Dead Sea Scrolls provide the Jewish context for these ideas, showing that the expectation of a radical divine intervention was not a fringe belief but a central aspect of religious thought. The Qumran community, for example, believed that they were the generation chosen to witness and participate in this now cosmic drama. Their rigorous lifestyle, their communal separation, and their intense study of prophecy were all geared towards preparing themselves for this imminent divine act. This shared horizon of expectation makes the scrolls an indispensable tool for understanding the theological backdrop of early Christianity. The dualistic worldview, so prominent in Qumranic texts, also has strong echoes in the New Testament. The contrast between light and darkness, truth and falsehood, the children of God and the children of evil, is a pervasive theme in the Gospel of John and the letters of Paul. While the spectri see manifestations of this dualism Qumran's focus on a literal war between the sons of light and darkness versus Christianity as more spiritual battle against sin and evil. The underlying conceptual framework is remarkably similar. Both traditions understood human history as a struggle between cosmic forces, culminating in a decisive divine victory. This shared understanding of the world as a battleground between good and evil provided a powerful narrative for both communities, shaping their ethical codes, their communal identity, and their hopes for the future. The scrolls allow us to trace the lineage of these profound theological concepts, demonstrating their deep roots in Second Temple Judaism. Chapter 16. The Copper Scroll, Treasure, Mystery, and Historical Significance. 20 minutes. Among the thousands of parchment and papyrus fragments, one Dead Sea Scroll stands out as a unique anomaly, the Copper Scroll, 3Q15. Unlike the literary and religious texts, this scroll is a meticulously engraved list of 64 locations where vast quantities of gold, silver, and other precious items are purportedly buried across Judea and Jerusalem. Discovered in Cave 3 in 1952, its very material, pure copper, speaks to the extraordinary nature of its contents. This was not a scroll meant for spiritual contemplation, but a practical, albeit enigmatic, inventory of hidden wealth. Its language, a Hebrew unlike the literary Hebrew of other scrolls, and its format as a treasure map have puzzled scholars for decades, sparking both academic debate and popular fascination. The Copper Scroll is an absolute enigma. It reads like something out of an adventure novel, detailing immense quantities of treasure, tons of gold and silver, hidden in spectri sea locations. The question that immediately arises is it real? Is it a genuine inventory of treasure, or is it a work of fiction, a symbolic text? The sheer scale of the wealth described, far exceeding anything known from the Second Temple period, makes many scholars skeptical of its literal interpretation. However, the meticulous detail, the use of real place names, and the very act of engraving it on copper, a durable and expensive material, suggest a serious purpose. If it is real, it represents an almost unimaginable fortune, potentially belonging to the Jerusalem temple or a wealthy sect. If it's symbolic, its meaning remains deeply obscure. The debate continues, highlighting the enduring mystery at the heart of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The challenges of deciphering and interpreting the copper scroll were immense. Due to its brittle, oxidized state, it could not be unrolled like the other scrolls. Instead, it had to be cut into 23 strips in 1956 at the University of Manchester, allowing its contents to be read. The detailed list includes not only the type and quantity of treasure but also precise, often cryptic, instructions for finding it, such as in the ruin that is in the Valley of Acre, under the steps leading to the east. 40 cubits, a chest of money and its contents, of a weight of 17 talents. The language and orthography are distinct from other Qumran texts, suggesting it may have been written by a D-errant scribe or originated from a D-errant community. Its unique nature has led some to believe it was a genuine inventory of temple treasures hidden before the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, while others propose it's a symbolic or even a national list, perhaps a literary exercise or a coded message. Regardless of its true nature, the copper scroll adds another layer of intrigue to the Dead Sea Scrolls, reminding us of the diverse literary and historical treasures hidden within those ancient caves. Chapter 17. The Destruction of Qumran and the End of an Era. 20 minutes. The vibrant life of the Qumran community, alongside the broader Jewish society of Judea, came to a violent end with the outbreak of the First Jewish Revolt against Rome, 66 to 73 CE. This catastrophic conflict, fueled by religious zeal, political oppression, and messianic fervor, saw the might of the Roman legions descend upon Judea, culminating in the destruction of Jerusalem and its Second Temple in 70 CE. The Qumran community, situated strategically near the Dead Sea, found itself directly in the path of the advancing Roman forces. Archaeological evidence suggests that the settlement was attacked and destroyed, likely around 68 CE, by the 10th Roman Legion, Legio Exfratensis, which was systematically pacifying the region. The destruction of Qumran was not an isolated event. It was part of a much larger tragedy, the Roman suppression of the Jewish revolt. The community, with its intense apocalyptic expectations, may have seen these events as the full fulfillment of their own prophecies, the cosmic battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. The archaeological record at Qumran tells a poignant story, signs of a sudden attack, widespread burning, and the abandonment of the site. It's believed that before the Roman advance, the community hastily concealed their precious scrolls in the surrounding caves, hoping to preserve them from destruction. This act of preservation, born out of desperation, is precisely why we have them today. It's a testament to their profound belief in the enduring value of their texts, even as their physical community faced annihilation. The destruction of Qumran marks the end of a unique chapter in Jewish history, but paradoxically, it also ensured the survival of their literary legacy for millennia. After the destruction, Qumran was briefly occupied by Roman troops and later by Jewish rebels during the Second Jewish Revolt, Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132 to 135 CE, but it never regained its former communal life. The Essene movement, or at least its Qumran branch, actively vanished from history, leaving behind only their enigmatic settlement and the hidden library of scrolls. The Roman destruction not only ended the Qumran community but also profoundly reshaped the landscape of Judaism, leading to the rise of Rabbinic Judaism, which focused on synagogue and study rather than temple sacri. CE. The scrolls thus serve as a poignant reminder of a lost world, a vibrant and diverse Judaism that existed before the catastrophic events of the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. Their survival allows us to glimpse the rich tapestry of beliefs and practices that were tragically swept away by the tides of history, airing an invaluable counterpoint to the narratives that survived. Part 5. Legacy and Enduring Impact. Approximately 60 minutes. Chapter 18. The Scrolls and Modern Scholarship. Ongoing Debates. 20 minutes. The discovery and ongoing study of the Dead Sea Scrolls have not only illuminated ancient history but have also sparked continuous scholarly debate, challenging long-held assumptions and opening new avenues of research. From the initial controversies surrounding their publication to ongoing discussions about their authorship, interpretation, and historical context, the scrolls remain a dynamic field of inquiry. Scholars grapple with questions of textual variance, the relationship between the errant scroll fragments, and the precise nature of the Qumran community. These debates are not merely academic exercises. They shape our understanding of biblical texts, the evolution of Judaism, and the origins of Christianity. One of the most persistent debates revolves around the identity of the Qumran community. While the Essene hypothesis remains the dominant view, alternative theories propose that the community consisted of Zadokite priests, a diverse collection of Jewish sects, or even a military outpost. Each theory brings its own set of arguments, drawing on errant interpretations of archaeological evidence, textual analysis, and historical sources. These debates highlight the complexity of the material and the challenges of reconstructing ancient history from fragmented evidence. It's a testament to the richness of the scrolls that they continue to generate such vibrant and ongoing scholarly discussion, forcing us to constantly re-evaluate our assumptions and our understanding. The process of scholarship is never static. It's a continuous conversation with the past, and the Dead Sea Scrolls are at the very heart of that conversation. Another significant area of debate concerns the textual variants found within the biblical scrolls. While the scrolls largely confirm the accuracy of the Masoretic text, they also present alternative readings that sometimes align with the Septuagint or other ancient versions. This raises crucial questions about the original text of the Hebrew Bible, the process of its standardization, and the authority of errant textual traditions. Scholars meticulously compare these variants, seeking to understand their origins and their implications for biblical interpretation. This work is not about undermining faith but about deepening our understanding of how the sacred texts were transmitted and preserved across centuries, revealing the dynamic and often complex history of the Bible itself. The scrolls have provided an unprecedented window into this process, allowing for a more informed and nuanced approach to textual criticism. Chapter 19, The Scrolls and the Bible. Textual Criticism and Canon Formation. 20 minutes. The Dead Sea Scrolls have profoundly impacted the field of biblical textual criticism, providing a treasure trove of ancient manuscripts that shed light on the transmission history of the Hebrew Bible. Before their discovery, the oldest complete Hebrew biblical manuscripts dated to the medieval period, around 10th century CE. The scrolls push this timeline back by a millennium, airing direct evidence of biblical texts from the Second Temple period. This allowed scholars to compare these ancient versions with later traditions, revealing both remarkable textual stability and fascinating variations. The scrolls have become a cornerstone for understanding how the biblical canon was formed and how its texts evolved over time. The most significant contribution of the biblical scrolls is their confirmation of the overall integrity of the Hebrew Bible. Despite a 1,000-year gap, the texts found at Qumran are remarkably similar to the Masoretic text we use today. This is a powerful testament to the meticulous care of ancient Jewish scribes. However, the scrolls also reveal that the textual tradition was not entirely monolithic. The errant editions or recensions of certain books, like Jeremiah and Samuel, which sometimes align more closely with the Greek Septuagint. This suggests that in the Second Temple period, there was a greater aridity in biblical texts than previously assumed. It doesn't mean the Bible is unreliable. Rather, it provides scholars with a richer understanding of its complex transmission history, allowing us to reconstruct earlier forms of the text and appreciate the diversity of early Jewish textual traditions. It's like having multiple eyewitness accounts of an ancient event, each airing slightly errant details but rming the core narrative. The scrolls have also provided crucial insights into the process of canon formation. The presence of certain books in the Qumran library, like Enoch and Jubilees, which were not ultimately included in the Jewish or Protestant canons, indicates that the boundaries of what constituted Scripture were still somewhat fluid during the Second Temple period. The absence of other books, like Esther, from the Qumran collection is also noteworthy. These observations provide invaluable data for scholars studying the historical development of the biblical canon, demonstrating that the process was gradual and involved complex theological and communal decisions. The scrolls are a tangible glimpse into a time when the sacred texts were still in a state of dynamic formation, before the definitive closure of the Jewish canon. This perspective helps us to understand the debates and discussions that shaped the Bible as we know it today, highlighting the importance of community and tradition in the recognition and preservation of inspired writings. Chapter 20: The Digital Age and the Future of Scroll Research. 20 minutes. In the 21st century, the Dead Sea Scrolls have entered the digital age, making these ancient texts more accessible to scholars and the public than ever before. Initiatives like the Dead Sea Scrolls Digital Library, a collaboration between the Israel Museum and Google, have meticulously digitized thousands of fragments, creating high-resolution images that allow for unprecedented levels of study and preservation. This digital revolution has transformed scroll research, enabling scholars worldwide to access and analyze the texts without the need for physical travel, fostering new collaborations and accelerating the pace of discovery. The digital platform also ensures the long-term preservation of these fragile artifacts, protecting them from further deterioration while making them universally available. The digitization of the Dead Sea Scrolls is a game-changer. It democratizes access to these invaluable texts, moving them from the exclusive domain of a few specialists to a global community of scholars and enthusiasts. Advanced imaging techniques, such as multispectral imaging, are revealing previously illegible text, literally bringing new words to light from fragments that were once thought to be blank. This technology allows us to see beneath surface damage, to distinguish between the errant layers of ink, and to identify palimpsests, texts written over erased earlier writings. It's an exciting time to be a scroll scholar, as these digital tools are continuously opening up new avenues of research and helping us to reconstruct the texts with greater accuracy than ever before. The future of scroll research is intertwined with these technological advancements, promising even deeper insights into these ancient mysteries. Beyond academic research, the digital accessibility of the Dead Sea Scrolls has fostered a renewed public interest in these ancient texts, allowing individuals to explore their contents and engage with their historical and religious significance. Educational programs, online courses, and popular media continue to bring the story of the scrolls to a wider audience, ensuring that their legacy endures. The scrolls are not merely relics of the past. They are living documents that continue to challenge, inform, and inspire. As new generations of scholars and enthusiasts engage with these texts, the Dead Sea Scrolls will undoubtedly continue to reveal new secrets, enriching our understanding of the ancient world and the enduring human quest for meaning and connection to the divine. Their journey from dusty caves to digital screens is a testament to their timeless power and relevance. Chapter 21. Conclusion: The enduring legacy of the Dead Sea Scrolls. 20 minutes. From the moment of their serendipitous discovery by a young Bedouin shepherd to their meticulous digitization in the 21st century, the Dead Sea Scrolls have profoundly reshaped our understanding of ancient Judaism and the origins of Christianity. They are not just ancient manuscripts. They are a bridge to a lost world, a vibrant tapestry of beliefs, practices, and hopes that existed 2 millennia ago. They have the remarkable fidelity of biblical transmission, unveiled the rich diversity of Second Temple Judaism, and provided an indispensable context for the emergence of early Christianity. Their legacy is not merely academic. It is spiritual, cultural, and historical, touching the lives of countless individuals who seek to understand the foundations of Western civilization and the roots of their faith. The Dead Sea Scrolls remind us that history is rarely simple, and faith is often far more complex and dynamic than we imagine. They challenge us to embrace nuance, to question assumptions, and to continually seek a deeper understanding of our past. They show us that the world of Jesus was not a blank slate, but a vibrant, turbulent, and intellectually rich environment, led with diverse voices and fervent expectations. By engaging with these ancient texts, we don't just learn about history. We learn about ourselves, our traditions, and the enduring human search for truth. The scrolls are a testament to the power of written words to transcend time, to connect us with those who came before, and to continue shaping our understanding of who we are and where we come from. They are, truly, a secret revealed, a whisper from the past that continues to resonate with profound significance today. And so, the journey through the Dead Sea Scrolls concludes, but their story continues. Each fragment, each word, holds the potential for new discoveries, new insights, and new questions. They stand as a timeless monument to human faith, resilience, and the enduring quest for divine knowledge. A secret once hidden in desert caves, now revealed to the world, inviting us all to explore the profound mysteries of our shared past. The desert does not keep secrets. It buries them. It is a place of profound absence, an ocean of sand and silence, a place of heat and wind, where the contours of the earth are in constant, slow-motion flux. Beneath this void, somewhere in the western desert of Egypt, lies the answer to one of the greatest military mysteries in human history. It is not a golden city. It is not a pharaoh's treasure. It is a graveyard. A graveyard for 50,000 men. 50,000 sons, brothers, and fathers. An entire generation of an empire's elite, consumed by the sand. In the year 524 BC, a colossal Persian army, the elite of the world's first superpower, marched into this emptiness and vanished from the face of the earth. They were not defeated in any known battle. No survivors ever returned. No prisoners were ever taken. No bodies were ever found. They were, in a single moment of history, simply erased. For 2.5 millennia, their fate has been a ghost story. A legend of a mad king, an offended god, and a storm of divine retribution. This isn't just a story. It's a black hole in the historical record. We have the before, a 50,000-man army, one of the largest forces of its time, marching out from a known location, Thebes. And we have the after, nothing, complete and total silence. It's a historian's nightmare. And it's an archaeologist's ultimate fantasy. But what really happened to the lost army of Cambyses II? Was it truly an act of God, a sandstorm sent to punish a king's arrogance? Was it the greatest logistical failure in ancient history, a colossal military blunder? Or was the entire story a sophisticated lie, a 2,500-year-old cover-up, hiding a military disaster that would have shaken the ancient world to its core? This is the search for the army that walked off the map and into oblivion. To understand why an army was lost, we must first understand the man who sent it. He was not just a king. He was the son of a legend. His name was Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great. His father, Cyrus, was a figure of myth. He founded the Achaemenid Empire, the first true world empire. He was a unifier, a liberator, a genius. He conquered the vast Median Empire. He defeated the impossibly wealthy King Croesus of Lydia. He conquered the impenetrable fortress of Babylon, not by force, but by diverting the Euphrates River and walking his army in on the dry riverbed. He is praised in the Old Testament for freeing the Jewish people from their Babylonian captivity. He was so respected that even his enemies, the Greeks, wrote of him as the ideal ruler. Imagine having that as your father. The pressure on Cambyses must have been immense. Cyrus conquered Babylon. He conquered Lydia. He built an empire from the Indus River to the Mediterranean. What was left for Cambyses to conquer? How could he ever measure up? Cambyses had been his father's co-regent. He had ruled Babylon. He was not inexperienced. But he was not Cyrus. There was only one prize left. The only other great power of the ancient world. The oldest, wealthiest, and most enigmatic civilization on earth, the Kingdom of Egypt. For Persia, Egypt was the final rival. For Cambyses, it was his chance to step out of his father's shadow. In 525 BC, he invaded. The timing was perfect. The long-reigning, politically savvy pharaoh Cambyses II had just died, leaving the throne to his son, Psamtik III, who had little experience. And Cambyses did not come alone. He came with a secret weapon. Fans of Halicarnassus, a brilliant Greek mercenary commander who had served Pharaoh Cambyses, knew all of his military secrets, and then, after a bitter dispute, defected to the Persians. Fans gave Cambyses everything: the Egyptian battle plans, their troop deployments, and, most importantly, the secret to crossing the deadly Sinai Desert, a pact with the local Bedouin tribes to create hidden water depots for his army, allowing them to bypass the Egyptian frontier defenses. The decisive battle was fought at Pelusium, a fortress city at the mouth of the Nile. Here, legend and history blur. The Greek historian Polyaios, writing centuries later, tells a strange story. He claims Cambyses, knowing the Egyptians worshipped cats as sacred to the goddess Bastet, had a clever and sacrilegious idea. He ordered his front-line soldiers to either carry cats or paint them on their shields. The Egyptian soldiers, terrified of harming the animals and incurring divine wrath, faltered. Their lines broke. The Persians broke their lines and slaughtered them. It's a fantastic story, but many historians doubt it. It's the kind of tale the Greeks love to tell to paint the barbarian Persians as cunning and the superstitious Egyptians as foolish. The reality is likely more conventional. The Persian army was simply bigger, better led, and more experienced. Egypt, the eternal kingdom, had fallen. Cambyses marched into the capital of Memphis. He captured Psamtik III. He was crowned pharaoh, adopting the full, five-fold titles and traditions of a 5,000-year-old monarchy. He was, by all accounts, the most powerful man on earth. But power is a volatile thing. And our primary source for what happened next paints a dark, terrifying picture. This is Herodotus, the father of history. He traveled through Egypt a few generations after Cambyses and wrote down the stories he heard from the Egyptian priests. And those priests hated Cambyses. We have to be critical of Herodotus. We call him the father of history, but he's also the father of lies. He was an ethnographer, a storyteller. He took what he was told and he wrote it down. He was also a Greek, writing for a Greek audience, and the Greeks hated the Persians. This story of a hubristic Persian king being struck down by the gods? It's perfect propaganda. They told Herodotus that Cambyses was not a conqueror, but a monster, a desecrator. They claimed that upon his conquest, he descended into a violent madness, fueled by what Herodotus calls the sacred disease, or epilepsy, and heavy drinking. He allegedly had his own brother, Smerdis, murdered out of jealousy. He supposedly married two of his own sisters, and then, in a fit of rage, kicked one of them while she was pregnant, killing her and her unborn child. He supposedly had his personal cupbearer, a young boy, shot through the heart with an arrow in front of his father, just to prove his hands weren't shaking from drink. But for the Egyptians, his ultimate sin was the incident of the Apis bull. The Apis bull is not just an animal. It is a god on earth, a living manifestation of the god Ptah. It is chosen by priests based on sacred markings, a white triangle on its forehead, a crescent moon on its flank. When it dies, the entire nation goes into mourning, as if the pharaoh himself had died. It is the most sacred thing in Egypt. According to Herodotus, Cambyses, in a fit of jealous rage, mocked the Egyptians for worshipping a beast. He demanded to see this god. When the bull was brought before him, he drew his dagger and tried to stab it in the belly, but missed, striking it in the thigh. The bull sickened and died from the wound. Cambyses, Herodotus says, laughed, and had the priests scourged. To the Egyptians, this was the ultimate blasphemy. Cambyses had not just killed an animal. He had murdered a god. It's a horrifying story. But is it true? This is where the story gets complicated. We have the sarcophagus for the Apis bull that died during Cambyses' reign. And the inscription on it, written by an Egyptian priest, says that Cambyses, quote, dedicated it as a pious pharaoh. He gave it a full, royal, traditional burial. This is the complete opposite of Herodotus' story. So, was Herodotus lying? Or were the priests forced to write that inscription by the king who had just murdered their god? The ambiguity is total. So who was the real Cambyses? The pious pharaoh, or the mad desecrator? This question is the key, because the answer determines what happened next. Was his next move a calculated, strategic gamble? Or was it the act of a madman? From his new throne in Egypt, Cambyses, now pharaoh, planned to expand his empire to the very edges of the known world. He devised a massive, three-pronged campaign to secure all of Africa. This isn't madness. This is grand strategy. If he pulls this off, he controls all of North Africa, the trade routes through the Sahara, and the gold mines of Nubia. He would have exceeded his father, Cyrus. This is his moment. First, he would send his powerful fleet to conquer the wealthy merchant city of Carthage, in modern-day Tunisia, and secure the entire North African coast. Second, he would lead his main army south, up the Nile, to conquer the mysterious and gold-rich lands of Ethiopia, or Nubia, securing Egypt's southern border. And third, he would dispatch a force west, into the great void of the Libyan desert. The campaign was a disaster from the start. The invasion of Carthage was aborted before it began. His fleet was crewed by Phoenicians, the greatest sailors of the age. But Carthage had been founded by Phoenicians. They were kin, a daughter city. The sailors flatly refused the order to attack their own people. Cambyses, an emperor on land, was powerless at sea. The second prong, the invasion of Ethiopia, was led by Cambyses himself. And it was a catastrophe. Herodotus claims he was completely unprepared for the harsh, barren lands of Nubia. Before he even set out, Herodotus spins a bizarre tale. He says Cambyses sent spies from the Ethiophagi, or fish-eaters, to the Ethiopian king, bearing gifts. But the king, a giant of a man, saw through the ruse. He mocked the gifts and handed the spies a massive Ethiopian bow, telling them that when the Persians could draw that bow, they could invade. Until then, they should be thankful the gods never put it in the minds of the Ethiopians to conquer Persia. Furious at the insult, Cambyses supposedly launched his invasion in a fit of rage, without properly securing supplies. His army marched south, ran out of food, and was decimated by starvation. Herodotus tells a horrifying, if unproven, tale that the soldiers ate their pack animals, then the grass, and then they resorted to casting lots, and eating one in every 10 of their own men. Cambyses, defeated not by an army but by geography, was forced into a humiliating retreat back to Egypt. Two prongs of his grand ambition were broken. Only the third remained. This army was not a primary invasion force. It was, according to Herodotus, a punitive expedition. A mission of pure, blind vengeance. The target was a small, remote patch of green in a sea of sand, hundreds of miles west of the Nile. It was called the Siwa Oasis. Siwa is special. It's unbelievably remote, even today. It's this tiny island of life in a sea of death. And in antiquity, this remoteness gave it power. It was seen as a place outside of time. A place where the gods spoke clearly. The oracle there, the oracle of Ammon, was so famous it was known to the Greeks, who equated Ammon with their own king of the gods, Zeus. So to them, this was the oracle of Zeus Ammon. People came from all over, Greeks, Libyans, Egyptians, to ask questions of the god, who spoke through his priests. The oracle's word was law. 2 centuries later, Alexander the Great would make a dangerous pilgrimage here across the same desert, risking his entire army, just to have the oracle confirm that he was the son of a god. That's how important Siwa was. But when Cambyses, the new pharaoh, sent messengers to the oracle, the priests, loyal to the old Egyptian regime, apparently gave him a defiant or disrespectful answer. Herodotus is not specific, but it's likely they refused to legitimize his rule. They refused to call him the true son of Ammon, the traditional title of the pharaoh. For Cambyses, reeling from his failures in Carthage and Ethiopia, perhaps slipping into the madness Herodotus described, perhaps furious at this political defiance, this was an insult that could not stand. He would not just conquer the oracle. He would erase it. From his base in Thebes, Cambyses detached a force. Herodotus gives a specific number, 50,000 men. An astonishing figure. He gave them a single, sacrilegious order: march to Siwa, enslave the inhabitants, and burn the temple of the oracle to the ground. The army marched west from Thebes, into the known. Their first stop was the Karga Oasis, the last outpost of civilization, a 7-day march. They arrived, restocked on water, and turned their faces to the unknown. They were now leaving the map. Ahead of them lay 300 miles of the Great Sand Sea, one of the most arid and trackless regions on Earth. And now, we turn to the only passage in history that describes what happened. the only words that survived. Let us read Herodotus, Book 3, Chapter 26. The men, it is said, reached the oasis of Karga, which is 7 days' march from Thebes. After this, they continued their march towards the oracle. But what became of them afterwards, no man can say. None of them ever returned. The Siwans themselves report this, that after the army left the oasis of Karga and was marching through the sand to them, they had reached somewhere halfway when a great and terrible wind came up from the south, a simoom, a red storm. It lifted up vast pillars of sand, and it wholly buried the army, so that not a single man was ever seen again. 50,000 men buried alive. It is one of the most terrifying, cinematic images from the ancient world. But is it true? For centuries, the story was accepted. A perfect parable. A mad king, blinded by hubris, defies the gods. The gods, in turn, unleash the very elements to swallow his army whole. But in the last century, historians, archaeologists, and geologists have begun to question every part of Herodotus's story. We have to be critical of Herodotus. We call him the father of history, but he's also the father of lies. He was an ethnographer, a storyteller. He took what he was told and he wrote it down. He was also a Greek, writing for a Greek audience, and the Greeks hated the Persians. This story of a hubristic Persian king being struck down by the gods? It's perfect propaganda. The first crack in the story, the number 50,000. This is almost certainly an exaggeration. A common trope in ancient history is to make a story more dramatic. Let's be clear about ancient numbers. They are almost all fantasy. Herodotus says Xerxes invaded Greece with 1.7 million men. Modern historians think it was maybe 200,000. Ancient writers used numbers for effect, not for accuracy. 50,000 means an unimaginably large army. It's a literary device. Let's just do the math. A soldier on the march in an arid climate needs, at minimum, 2 gallons of water per day, just for drinking. That's 100,000 gallons of water per day. A gallon weighs 8.3 pounds. That's 830,000 pounds of just water, every single day. Now add water for the thousands of pack animals, the cavalry horses, the support staff. You are talking about a logistical impossibility. They can carry it. There's nowhere to get it. A modern army with tankers and airdrops would struggle. Cambyses' army? No. The number is wrong. 5,000? Maybe. 10,000? A huge stretch. 50,000? It's fantasy. The second crack, the cause of death. The simoom. A sandstorm so violent it could bury an entire army on the march. We call these huboobs. They are terrifying. A wall of dust a mile high, moving at 60 miles per hour. They blot out the sun, the temperature drops. The static electricity is so high your hair stands on end. They are unsurvivable in the open. But do they bury you? No. That's a Hollywood myth. They blast you with fine particulate. You suffocate on the dust. You get disoriented. Your equipment is destroyed. But the storm itself doesn't just dump 50 feet of sand on you. It scours you. It's an executioner, not a grave digger. Geologists agree. A storm is more likely to scatter an army, destroying their supplies and filling their water skins with sand. The sand dunes themselves, the massive Barcan dunes of the Great Sand Sea, migrate. They move, but they move at a rate of feet per year, not feet per minute. They are rivers of sand, not tidal waves. The real cause of death would be what came after the storm, mass dehydration and exposure. They would have died slowly, scattered over miles of desert. The sand would then cover their bodies, but slowly. Over decades. Centuries, which leads to the biggest, most damning question of all. If an army this large died, no matter how, where is the evidence? An army of even 5,000 men would leave a staggering trail of archaeological refuse. We should find bronze arrowheads, iron swords, the metal skeletons of shields, chariot wheels, and pottery. My God, the pottery, millions of shards from their water and food jars, and, of course, bones. Tens of thousands of human and animal skeletons. Even 2,500 years later, the desert preserves. It doesn't destroy. It mummifies. We find Roman camps. We find Neolithic tools. We find caches of wine jars from 5,000 years ago. We find everything. But of this army? This massive military force? Not 1/10% of a find. Nothing. This complete lack of evidence has led to a second, far more explosive theory. A theory that claims there was no sandstorm. That the army did have a battle, and that Herodotus's entire story is a brilliant piece of propaganda, a cover-up for one of the greatest military blunders in Persian history. This is the Petabastis theory. In 2003, historian Olaf Kaper, excavating at the Dakhla oasis, made a startling connection. He pointed out that Herodotus was writing 70 years after the event, based on what the Siwan priests, the very priests whose temple Cambyses sought to destroy, told him. What if they lied to protect a far darker secret? Kaper's theory is brilliant. It recontextualizes everything. He suggests the Persian army was not marching on Siwa at all. That was a fake target. Their real target was the Dakhla oasis, much further south. Why? Because that's where the real threat was. We know from other sources, including Demotic papyri and inscriptions, that when Cambyses died a few years later, the Persian Empire erupted in rebellion, and one of those rebels was a powerful Egyptian noble, a self-proclaimed pharaoh and a member of the old royal line, named Petabastis III. The theory goes like this. Petabastis III had raised a large rebel army in the western desert, operating out of the Dakhla and Kargil oases. He was a genuine threat to the new, fragile Persian control of Egypt. The 50,000 men sent by Cambyses were not on a petty, punitive mission against an oracle. They were a serious counterinsurgency force, sent to find and destroy this rebel army. But they failed. The Egyptians, who knew the desert like the back of their hand, lured the heavily armored Persian army deep into the waterless void between the oases. They used guerrilla tactics. They poisoned wells. They ambushed the supply lines, and finally, somewhere near the Dakhla oasis, they cornered the exhausted, thirsty, and disoriented Persians, and they massacred them. It wasn't an act of God. It was a devastating, humiliating military defeat for the Persian Empire. This would be a catastrophe. To admit that 50,000, or even 10,000 of their elite troops were wiped out by a ragtag band of Egyptian rebels? It's unthinkable. It would be like a modern superpower losing a division to an unorganized militia. It would inspire rebellions everywhere. So, a story was born. A cover-up, conceived by the Persians or perhaps even by the victorious Egyptians themselves. Think about it. The Persians get a divine excuse that hides their military incompetence. The Egyptians get a terrifying propaganda story. The gods of Egypt protect us. They sent a sandstorm to swallow our enemies. It's the perfect alibi. It blames no human. It explains the lack of survivors. And, best of all, it serves as a terrifying warning to anyone who would dare defy the gods of Egypt. This theory gains even more traction when you look at who came after Cambyses. Cambyses died a few years later in 522 BC, on his way back to Persia, under very mysterious circumstances. The man who took the throne was his distant relative, Darius I. Darius's entire reign began with him crushing rebellions. His most famous monument, the Behistun inscription, is a giant billboard carved into a mountain, listing all the liar kings he defeated. And on that list? A rebel in Egypt. This wasn't a minor skirmish. This was a full-blown war for the throne. The lost army story, which makes Cambyses look insane and incompetent, makes Darius, the man who restored order, look like the savior. This theory explains the why and the how. But it still leaves the where. If the army was massacred, the bodies, and the weapons, must still be out there. The search for the lost army has tantalized explorers for a century. The most famous was the Hungarian aristocrat, Count Laszlo Almasi, the real-life English patient. In the 1930s, while mapping the unknown reaches of the Libyan desert, he became obsessed with the story. He used Herodotus as his map, searching the routes between the oases, but found only endless sand and prehistoric cave paintings. The trail went cold for decades. The desert, it seemed, was determined to hold its silence. Then, in November 2009, the world's media exploded with a single headline: Lost Army of Cambyses Found. Two Italian archaeologists, twin brothers named Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, claimed they had found it. For years, they had been focusing their search not on the traditional route, but much farther south, near the border of Sudan. They presented a stunning collection of evidence. A mass grave filled with human bones, Persian-style bronze arrowheads, a silver bracelet, pieces of a horse's bridle, and, crucially, pottery from the Achaemenid period. It seemed to be the smoking gun. The Castiglione theory was that the army had taken a different, more southerly route, been caught in the Samum, and taken refuge in a large rock formation, where they were buried alive. The world celebrated. The mystery was solved, but almost immediately, the academic community fired back. The Castiglione discovery was problematic. The artifacts were real, but they were found scattered over a wide area, near a known trade route. This is exactly what you'd expect to find from centuries of Bedouin and Roman-era traffic. The mass grave was more likely a common burial ground, unrelated to the Persians. There was no C14 dating. There was no peer review. The arrowheads were of a type used for centuries, all over the region. The pottery was Persian era, but not definitively Persian military. It was archaeology by press conference, not by publication. The Castiglione discovery, once celebrated, was largely dismissed by mainstream archaeology. It was another false dawn. The lost army of Cambyses had slipped back into the realm of legend, but the hunt is not over. Today, it's being waged not with shovels, but from space. The Great Sand Sea is one of the largest, most inhospitable places on the planet. You can't excavate it, but you can scan it. We use satellite imagery, thermal, multispectral, to look for anomalies. We use ground-penetrating radar. The dunes move. They are alive, migrating with the wind. An army buried 20 feet deep one century might be briefly exposed to the air the next. We look for shadows, subtle discolorations in the soil, magnetic anomalies from buried metal, a shield, a sword, a helmet, hidden just beneath the sand. They are searching for a needle in a moving haystack. A faint metallic signature, a cluster of human bones, a 2,500-year-old footprint in a sea of sand. The search area is the size of a small country. The task is monumental. So, where does that leave us? We have a ghost story, told by Herodotus, of a divine storm that punished a king's hubris. We have a logistical nightmare, of an army defeated by its own arrogance, dying of thirst under a brutal sun. And we have a political thriller, of a devastating military defeat and a brilliant 2,500-year-old cover-up. In the end, all three theories might be true. Cambyses, in his rage, did order an impossible mission. His generals, in their incompetence, did fail to supply it. And the army, lost and dying, was picked off by local rebels. The Samum was just the final, poetic nail in the coffin. A perfect excuse for everyone. Perhaps the mystery of the lost army endures not despite the lack of evidence, but because of it. The void in the desert has created a void in our history, and we have rushed to fill it with stories of mad kings, angry gods, and vast conspiracies. It is a story that warns of the terrifying power of nature, the fragility of empire, and the deadly consequences of arrogance. It reminds us that no matter how powerful we become, how vast our armies or how grand our ambitions, we are always at the mercy of the elements. Somewhere out there, beneath the wind and the sand, the truth of what happened in 524 BC is waiting. The 50,000 dead still have a story to tell, but the desert is a patient guardian. It holds its secrets well. And for now, it holds its silence. It is the greatest cold case in human history. A story that has captivated us, haunted us, for more than 2 millennia. It is a story of a perfect civilization, a paradise of impossible wealth, engineering, and military might. A city of concentric rings of land and water, gleaming with precious metals, ruled by 10 god-descended kings. A continental empire that, in a single day and night of violent cataclysm, was swallowed by the sea and vanished from human memory, leaving behind nothing but a name, Atlantis. The name itself evokes a feeling of profound loss, of a golden age buried beneath the waves. It is a story of a before time, a lost utopia. The human psyche craves this. We want to believe there was a time when we were better, when we were in harmony with the gods, before our own corruption led to a great fall. The story of Atlantis is the ultimate story of a fall from grace, a technological and moral Garden of Eden from which we were violently expelled. For over 2,000 years, we have been obsessed with it. We have launched 1,000 expeditions, written 10,000 books, and spent millions of dollars searching for it. We have looked in the Mediterranean, in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean, in Antarctica, in Scandinavia, in Bolivia, even in space. We have pointed to every major ancient ruin, from Stonehenge to the pyramids, to Tiwanaku, and whispered, what if? What if this is a colony? A remnant of that lost mother culture? And every single search has come back empty. The hunt for Atlantis has become a mirror, reflecting the dreams, the fears, and the delusions of every generation that seeks it. It has become a magnet for fringe theories, for wishful thinking, and for outright fantasy. It is a story that has been co-opted by mystics, by spiritualists, by nationalist pseudo-historians claiming their nation as the true homeland of this master race, and by internet sleuths with satellite photos. But what if we've been looking in the wrong way? What if the story is not a simple fable? What if the clues to its true location have been hiding in plain sight, dismissed by academics as fiction, misinterpreted by enthusiasts as proof, or ignored entirely? What if the story is not a simple myth, but a deeply garbled memory? A memory of a real place, a real people, and a real, world-ending cataclysm. And what if the final, shocking location has been staring us in the face all along? This is the hunt for the true location of Atlantis, and the clues that no one saw. Our story begins, and ends, with one man. Not a historian, not an archaeologist, not a mystic, but a philosopher. Plato. Every single thing we know, or think we know, about Atlantis comes from two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. It is not a legend passed down through 100 cultures. It is not a story from the Bible, or the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the Vedas. It is, quite literally, a story told by one man, in Athens, around 360 BC. If these two documents do not describe a real place, then no such place ever existed. Everything else is commentary. The story is a nested doll. It's a story within a story within a story. Plato writes the dialogue. In the dialogue, his character Critias tells a story. He begins by saying, I will repeat a tale. Which, though strange, is certainly true. He claims he heard it from his grandfather, who was 90 at the time, who heard it from his father, who heard it from the great Athenian lawgiver Solon, one of the 7 sages of Greece. Solon, Plato writes, traveled to Egypt around 570 BC, to the city of Sais in the Nile Delta. There, he spoke with the most ancient of the priests. He tried to impress them with Greek history, telling them of the great flood of Deucalion and the first man, Pharaonius, the priest, Plato says, looked at Solon with pity. He smiled and said, O Solon, Solon, you Hellenes are never anything but children, and there is not an old man among you. He explained that the Greeks, and all peoples, have their memories wiped clean by periodic cataclysms of fire and water, which is why their histories only go back a few thousand years. The Egyptians, he said, were different. Their civilization, protected by the Nile, was ancient. And in their sacred records, preserved in the temples, was the story of the greatest civilization of all. A civilization that the Greeks had forgotten. The priest described a mighty power that came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean. There was, he said, an island situated in front of the straits which are by you called the Pillars of Hercules. The Pillars of Hercules. The Strait of Gibraltar. For Plato's Greeks, this was the absolute edge of the known, civilized world. Beyond it lay the great, terrifying, unknown Atlantic, an ocean of mud, monsters, and endless chaos. And in that ocean, said the priest, lay this island, larger than Libya and Asia combined. Let us be clear. For a Greek in 360 BC, Libya meant North Africa, and Asia meant what we call Asia Minor, or modern-day Turkey. So this was a continent, a landmass of continental scale. And from this island, he said, there was a way to the other islands, and from these you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent, which surrounded the true ocean. This is a staggering detail, an island-hopping route to a second continent, on the other side of the Atlantic. A continent like the Americas. This single passage has fueled centuries of pre-Columbian contact theories. On this continent island, the priest continued, a great and wonderful empire had arisen. And its capital city, its center of power, was called Atlantis. In the second dialogue, the Critias, Plato gives a breathtaking, engineering-level description of its origin and layout. He says the island was given to the god Poseidon in the great dividing of the world. There, Poseidon fell in love with a mortal woman, Cleito, who lived on a hill. To protect her, he built a city. He broke the ground, Plato says, and created alternate zones of sea and land, 2 of land and 3 of water, concentric one with another, as if with a lathe. So that no man could get to the island, a perfect, geometrically impossible city of 5 rings. The central island, Plato says, was for the god and for the royal palace. The 2 rings of land were settled by his 10 sons, the first 10 kings of Atlantis. The eldest, Atlas, gave the island and the ocean their name. His twin, Cadaris, ruled the part of the island nearest the Pillars of Hercules, which is why that area is still called Gades, or Cadiz, today. This detail, this etymological link, feels so specific, so real. The city was a marvel of engineering. The kings built bridges, cased in metal, connecting the land rings. They dug tunnels, so that their warships, or triremes, could pass under the rings of land. They cut a massive canal, 300 feet wide and 100 feet deep, straight from the outer ring of water, 5 miles long, or 50 stadia, to the open sea. The city itself was impossibly wealthy. The kings, Plato says, had such an amount of wealth as was never before possessed by kings and potentates. They coated the city's walls in metal, the outer wall in brass, the middle wall in tin, and the inner wall, the wall of the citadel itself, flashed with the red light of orichalcum. Orichalcum. This is a word that has launched 1,000 theories. A mysterious, unknown metal, which Plato says was more precious in those days than anything except gold, and was mined from the earth in many parts of the island. Was it a natural alloy of copper and gold? Was it amber? Was it a form of brass, polished to a high sheen? The name itself simply means mountain copper. In 2015, ingots of what archaeologists called orichalcum were found in a 2,600-year-old shipwreck off Sicily. They were of brass alloy. But was this Plato's metal? We don't know. For Plato, it was the symbol of their vast, earthly wealth. They built their buildings from stone quarried from beneath the island, stone that was white, black, and red. As they quarried, they created massive, hollowed-out docks under the land rings. The bridges connecting the land rings were also coated in metal. The central island had a temple to Poseidon, a stadium in length, and half a stadium in width, a proportion of 2 to 1, just like the Parthenon in Athens. All of the outside of the temple, except the pinnacles, they covered with silver, and the pinnacles with gold. The inside was cased in ivory, gold, silver, and orichalcum. Inside was a colossal gold statue of Poseidon in his chariot, driving 6-winged horses, a statue so tall it touched the roof. There were hot and cold springs, baths for the kings and for the common people, and separate baths for horses and cattle. There were gymnasiums. The land rings were filled with docks, shipyards, and a harbor so dense with shipping that the sound of human voices and the din of all sorts was heard day and night. The harbor, he says, held 1,200 ships of war. The military was highly organized. The Great Plain was divided into 60,000 lots. Each of the 10 districts had to provide a quota, a certain number of chariots, horses, soldiers, and sailors. The total army numbered over 1,000,000 men, with 10,000 chariots. It was a bureaucratic, organized, terrifying military machine. The city sat on a great plain, which was surrounded by mountains to the north. The plains were fertile, fed by a massive, grid-like irrigation canal, 10,000 stadia in length, over 1,100 miles, and so rich it produced 2 harvests a year. The island bore every kind of fragrant tree or root or herb or wood. It had the fruit of the vine, and the grain which is the food of man, and that other kind of food which we call pulse. And, of course, it was home to every kind of animal, including, Plato specifies, a great number of elephants. For a time, this civilization was virtuous. The 10 kings would meet, hunt a sacred bull without weapons inside the temple, and swear an oath over its blood to rule justly. But there was a date. The Egyptian priest told Solon that this all happened 9,000 years before his time, 9,000 years before Solon, who lived around 600 BC. That puts the existence, and the destruction, of Atlantis at roughly 9600 BC. This date is the single biggest problem in the entire story. It is the rock upon which all literal interpretations of Atlantis are broken. 9600 BC is not the Bronze Age. It is not the Iron Age. It is not even the Neolithic. It is the end of the Pleistocene. The very dawn of the Holocene. It is the Stone Age. Humanity was just emerging from the last great ice age, a brutal cold snap called the Younger Dryas. The ice sheets were still miles thick over North America and Europe. The world was populated by woolly mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats. Human beings were hunter-gatherers, living in small, nomadic bands. We were just beginning to experiment with agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. We were making tools from stone, bone, and wood. We were living in caves and skin huts. The idea of a civilization in 9600 BC with organized armies, a navy of 1,200 ships, massive canal-digging engineering, metalworking, and a written language. It is not just improbable. It is impossible. It is a complete and total, screaming anachronism. And then, there is the destruction. Plato says this mighty empire, in its hubris, grew corrupt. The divine portion of their bloodline became diluted, and their human nature took over. They were filled with unrighteous avarice and power. They waged war, conquering parts of Europe and Africa, until they were stopped by a small, virtuous, ancient Athens. A city-state that Plato describes as existing 9,000 years before his own time, which is, again, an archaeological impossibility. There was no Athens in 9600 BC. After the war, Zeus, the king of the gods, looked upon the corruption of Atlantis and decided to punish it. He gathered the gods. And that is where the Critias ends. The text cuts off, mid-sentence. To find the end of the story, we have to go back to the Timaeus. Plato's description is short, brutal, and final. There occurred violent earthquakes and floods. And in a single grievous day and night, the island of Atlantis in like manner was swallowed up by the sea and disappeared. And this is the reason why the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way. And this was caused by the subsidence of the island, and that's it. That's the entire story. So, what do we have? A story of an impossible civilization, in an impossible time, told by a philosopher who was known for creating illustrative fictions, or noble lies, to make a philosophical point. The vast majority of classical scholars, archaeologists, and historians have a very simple and very clear answer. Atlantis is a myth. It is a noble lie. A philosophical allegory. Plato invented Atlantis as a literary device. He used it as a parable. The story of Atlantis is not about history. It's not about geology. It's about political science. Plato was living in the shadow of Athens' disastrous defeat in the Peloponnesian War. He had seen his city, a great naval empire that grew from the Delian League, become corrupt, arrogant, and hubristic. He saw it launch the disastrous Sicilian expedition, a failed invasion that cost it 200 ships and 40,000 men. He saw his city defeated by the land-based, agrarian, austere city-state of Sparta. And most traumatically, he had seen his mentor, Socrates, executed by the restored Athenian democracy. Plato hated democracy. He hated naval power. He believed it corrupted the soul of a state, making it greedy and unstable. So, he created a fable, Atlantis, the massive, wealthy, decadent, technologically advanced, naval empire that rules a continent. That was Plato's warning against imperial Athens. Atlantis is the ultimate might makes right state, the small, virtuous, agrarian, land-based ancient Athens that supposedly defeated it. That was Plato's ideal state. A small, incorruptible society, ruled by philosopher kings, much like the one he describes in his Republic. In the Republic, Plato lays out the blueprint for a perfect city. In the Critias, he shows us its opposite, the perfect, corrupt, material city. The story of Atlantis is a morality play. It's the allegory of the cave. It's the myth of Ur. It's Plato's warning that all human empires, no matter how great, will be destroyed by their own hubris. The ocean of mud that blocks the way, that's the impassable fog of a forgotten, cautionary tale. The greatest evidence for this? Plato's own student, Aristotle. The most brilliant mind of the ancient world, who studied under Plato for 20 years. Aristotle, who wrote about everything from physics to politics to biology, never once mentions Atlantis as a real place. In fact, later ancient writers quoted Aristotle as saying, "The man who dreamed it up also made it disappear." But, to complicate things, this isn't the only ancient opinion. Crantor, a follower of Plato in the next generation, writing a commentary on the Timaeus, apparently did believe it was history. The later philosopher Proclus, writing 800 years after Plato, claimed that Crantor had traveled to Egypt and had seen the very columns it says, covered in hieroglyphs, that told the story of Atlantis. This is, of course, a third-hand account. We don't have Crantor's original work. But it shows that from the very beginning, the debate was real, history, or allegory. For 2,000 years, the allegory side won. Atlantis was forgotten, dismissed as a philosopher's dream. Then, the mangled memory hypothesis emerged. What if the story is too specific? The rings, the orichalcum, the elephants, the 9,000 years, the canal measurements. What if these aren't just fictional details? What if they are garbled facts? This is the second great hypothesis. That Plato's story is not a myth, but a mangled memory, a distorted, third-hand echo of a real catastrophe, passed down for 1,000 years, like a game of telephone, until it reached Plato, who then used it for his own purposes. The first clue to unlocking this is the date. 9,000 years. It's the elephant in the room. What if, in the translation from Egyptian hieroglyphs, to Solon's Greek, to Critias's family story, a mistake was made? A single, simple, clerical error. What if the Egyptian symbol for 100 was misread as 1,000? This is a very common hypothesis. In that case, the disaster happened not 9,000 years before Solon, but 900. If we make that one simple change, 900 years before Solon's time, 600 BC, the date of 9600 BC suddenly becomes 1500 or 1600 BC, and 1600 BC is not the Stone Age. It is the absolute, glittering peak of the Bronze Age. And at that exact moment, the Mediterranean was home to a spectacular civilization that fits the description of Atlantis in terrifying, uncanny ways. We call them the Minoans. Based on the island of Crete, the Minoan civilization was Europe's first great leap forward. They were a thalassocracy, a naval empire. They controlled the Aegean. Their art was sophisticated, vibrant, full of life. Their palaces, like the one at Knossos, were sprawling, multi-story labyrinths with advanced plumbing, light wells, and beautiful frescoes of leaping dolphins and bare-breasted goddesses. They worshipped the bull. The myth of the Minotaur in the labyrinth is a garbled Greek memory of this civilization. And the famous bull-leaping frescoes at Knossos? They depict young men and women, acrobats, vaulting over the backs of charging bulls. This looks exactly like a ritualized version of what Plato described, the 10 kings, hunting a sacred bull without weapons in a central court. They were wealthy. They were powerful. They were a naval power. And they were, just like Atlantis, destroyed in a cataclysm. In 1628 BC, just a few miles north of Crete, a volcano erupted. We call it Thera. Today, it is the beautiful, crescent-shaped island of Santorini, a postcard for tourists. But in 1628 BC, It was one of the single largest volcanic explosions in recorded human history. It was a cataclysm that dwarfs Vesuvius or Krakatoa. The explosion had the force of over 100,000 Hiroshima bombs. It literally vaporized the center of the island, 40 cubic kilometers of rock. It sent a plume of ash 25 miles into the sky, blotting out the sun, causing global climate change. We have evidence of its ash on Greenland ice cores. We have records of frost in summer from China. The sound of the explosion would have been heard thousands of miles away. It was the loudest sound in human history. The explosion triggered massive earthquakes. And it created a colossal tsunami. A wall of water, perhaps 500 feet high, moving at the speed of a jetliner, that raced across the Aegean. Excavations at Akrotiri, on the island of Thera, have found a Minoan Pompeii, a city perfectly preserved under 60 feet of volcanic ash. There are no bodies. They saw it coming. They fled, but they had nowhere to go. The tsunami would have hit the northern coast of Crete in less than 30 minutes. It would have annihilated their entire fleet, their ports, their coastal cities. We find pumice stone from Thera in the ruins of Minoan port towns on Crete. The evidence is clear. In a single day, the Minoan naval empire was shattered. Their power was broken. They went into a terminal decline, and were soon conquered by the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. Their memory faded, becoming myth. The parallels are stunning. A mighty, advanced, wealthy naval empire, with a bold cult, destroyed in a single day by earthquakes and floods. This, for many, is the most rational, scientific solution to the Atlantis mystery. Plato, hearing the garbled, 900-year-old story from Egypt, who did trade with the Minoans, their art is found in Egyptian tombs, simply took the core of this real event, the collapse of the Minoan civilization, and grafted his own philosophical ideas onto it. He got the story right, but he got the details wrong. He mistranslated the date, changing 900 to 9000. He mistook the concentric ring harbor of the city of Akrotiri on Thera, or perhaps the labyrinth at Knossos, for the whole city, and he misplaced the location, moving it from the Aegean to the great unknown, the Atlantic, to make it more mysterious and grand. The Minoan hypothesis is elegant. It is plausible. It is based on real, spectacular archaeology. It is, by far, the leading academic theory for a real Atlantis, but it doesn't satisfy the true believers. It doesn't satisfy those who read Plato literally, because Plato was specific. He didn't say the Aegean. He said beyond the Pillars of Hercules. He described a city of concentric rings, which Knossos is not. He described a continent, larger than Libya and Asia combined, which the island of Crete is not. He mentioned elephants. What if Plato meant exactly what he said? This is where the hunt goes into the fringe, into the vast, open ocean. What if we must look in the Atlantic? This was the theory of the 19th century politician and writer Ignatius Donnelly. In his 1882 book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, he argued that Plato's story was literal, factual history, that a great continent once existed in the middle of the Atlantic, and that it was the mother culture of all ancient civilizations, the Egyptians, the Maya, the Inca. He claimed the similarities between pyramids in Egypt and pyramids in Mexico were proof of a shared, lost ancestor, a diffusionist idea that was popular at the time. This hyper-diffusionism has since been entirely discredited, as we now know these civilizations developed their complex cultures independently. He proposed that the Azores Islands, which sit on the mid-Atlantic ridge, were the mountain tops of this sunken continent. The problem? Modern geology. 100 years of ocean floor mapping has given us a clear picture. The theory of plate tectonics. Continents are made of light, granitic rock. The ocean floor is made of heavy, basaltic rock. Continents do not sink, they drift. The mid-Atlantic ridge, where the Azores sit, is a constructive margin, a place where the seafloor is actively being created and pushed apart, not sinking. Donnelly's idea is geologically impossible. There is no sunken continent. This search for a lost land in the Atlantic was picked up by others, most famously by the sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce. In the 1930s, Cayce, in a trance, claimed that Atlantis was a real, technologically advanced civilization that destroyed itself with a terrible crystal, a kind of power source that got out of control. He prophesied that a part of Atlantis would be discovered near the Bahamas in 1968 or 69, and right on schedule. In 1968, a line of massive, rectangular limestone blocks were found in shallow water off the coast of Bimini. It was called the Bimini Road. For a moment, it seemed Casey was right. But, once again, geologists stepped in. The road was shown to be a natural formation, a type of big rock that fractures in perfect, block-like, geometric patterns. The Atlantic search, it seemed, was a dead end. But what if the city wasn't on a continent in the Atlantic? What if it was a coastal city, at the Atlantic, that was destroyed? This brings us to candidate number 2, southern Spain, the Gulf of Cadiz, just outside the Strait of Gibraltar. This is the exact location Plato specified, in front of the Pillars of Hercules. And in antiquity, this area was home to a civilization that was legendary, even to the Greeks, the kingdom of Tartessus. Tartessus was an impossibly wealthy, semi-mythical kingdom that flourished from 1100 to 500 BC. It was known for its vast mineral wealth, silver, gold, and tin. The Bible refers to it as Tarshish, a place from which King Solomon imported vast riches. The German archaeologist Adolf Schalten searched for it his entire life, calling it the Atlantis of the West. It was a port city, a hub of Atlantic trade, and then, around 500 BC, it mysteriously vanished from history. The location is perfect. The wealth is perfect. And the destruction method? The Gulf of Cadiz is one of the most seismically active zones in the Atlantic. The African plate is colliding with the Eurasian plate right here. It is a tsunami generation zone, a massive earthquake, like the 1755 Lisbon quake which destroyed the city and sent a 60-foot tsunami into Cadiz, could have sent a wave that would have wiped a coastal city like Tartessus completely off the map, burying it under silt. Plato's shoal of mud could be the silted-up river delta. In 2011, a team of researchers, led by Richard Freund, using satellite photos, ground-penetrating radar, and electrical resistivity tomography, claimed to have found evidence of a great city buried in the wetlands of Donana National Park, north of Cadiz. They saw strange rectangular shapes, and what looked like concentric rings, buried in the mud. They found memorial cities, smaller copies of the lost city, built inland by the survivors. It made headlines worldwide, but the theory quickly collapsed. Spanish archaeologists, who had been working in Donana for decades, refuted the claims. The concentric rings and rectangular shapes were not a lost Bronze Age city. They were much, much younger. They were Roman-era buildings, salt pans, and fish farming structures. The memorial cities were just other Roman settlements. The hunt in Spain went cold, which brings us to the new, explosive candidate. A theory born not of archaeology, but of the internet. A theory born of Google Earth, of satellite photos, and YouTube videos. A theory that claims the true, undeniable clue has been visible from space the entire time. It is called the Richat structure. The Eye of the Sahara, located in the nation of Mauritania, in the middle of the barren Sahara Desert. The Richat structure is one of the most bizarre and stunning geological formations on Earth. It is a perfect, 40-kilometer, or 25-mile, wide set of concentric rings. For decades, geologists were baffled by it. They assumed it was an asteroid impact crater. But there was no shocked quartz, no impact melt. Today, they have a clear answer. It is a natural formation. A domed anticline, a massive, 100-million-year-old geological dome of layered rock that has been slowly uplifted by magma from below, and then eroded, like a giant onion being peeled from the top down. The rings are simply different layers of harder and softer rock, eroding at different rates. It is a natural wonder, but look at it. It is a city of concentric rings. This is the clue that, proponents say, everyone missed. They claim this is not a geological formation. This is Atlantis. The evidence is, at first glance, shockingly compelling. First, the appearance. It matches Plato's description of a city of alternate zones of sea and land, concentric one with another more perfectly than any other place on Earth. It is the only candidate that looks like Atlantis. Second, the measurements. Proponents of this theory claim that if you measure the rings of the Richat structure, they are a near-perfect match to Plato's dimensions, if you use a specific conversion for the stadia. Plato's central island, 5 stadia. The Richat's inner ring, 0.9 kilometers, which is 5 stadia. Plato's first water ring, 1 stadium. The Richat's first moat about 0.17 kilometers, which is 1 stadium. The second land ring, 2 stadia. The second rock ring, 0.34 kilometers. 2 stadia. The matches are, they claim, uncanny. Third, the location. It is beyond the Pillars of Hercules. It is on the continent of Libya, the ancient Greek name for all of North Africa. Fourth, the topography. Plato said the city was on a plain, and that to the north were mountains from which rivers flowed. The Richat structure sits on the edge of a vast, flat salt plain to the south. And to the north? The Adrar Mountains. Fifth, the opening to the sea. Plato described a massive canal, 50 stadia, about 5 miles, long, that connected the city to the ocean. Proponents point to a channel-like feature that runs south from the structure, out onto the salt flats, which they claim was this canal, leading to the ancient Atlantic. Sixth, the elephants. Plato specifically mentioned elephants. Where is the Richat structure? Africa. A continent famous for elephants. Seventh, the date. Proponents point to the 9600 BC date. This aligns perfectly with the African humid period, or the Green Sahara. A time when the Sahara was a lush grassland, filled with lakes, rivers, and elephants. The case seems powerful. Too many coincidences. The exact shape, the mountains, the plain, the elephants, the measurements, the date. But this is where the search for Atlantis demands we be not romantics, but scientists. And when we apply scientific scrutiny, the Richat theory, like all the others, collapses. It collapses catastrophically. Let's take the evidence apart, piece by piece. The geology is definitive. It is not a man-made city. It is a 100-million-year-old eroded dome. The rings are not walls. They are layers of sedimentary and igneous rock. Geologists are unanimous on this. To believe it's a city is to ignore the entire field of geology. The opening to the sea. The channel to the south? It's a gully, a dry river bed, or wadi. And, as fluvial geomorphology shows, it flows into the structure, not out of it. It's the product of water eroding into the dome from the surrounding highlands, not a canal dug out to the sea. And what about the sea itself? This is the killer. The Richat structure is 400 kilometers, 250 miles, inland. And, more importantly, its base is over 1,000 feet, 300 meters, above sea level. For the Atlantic Ocean to have reached the Richat structure, global sea levels would have to be 1,000 feet higher. A sea level rise of that magnitude would not just give Atlantis a harbor. It would drown London, New York, Tokyo, and nearly every coastal region on the planet. There is no geological evidence for such a flood. It is a geophysical impossibility. The measurements? They are a case of cherry picking. The structure is 40 kilometers, 25 miles, wide. Plato's city, in total, was about 127 stadia, which is roughly 23 kilometers, 14 miles. They don't actually match. The structure is almost twice as big as Plato's city. Proponents have to use a specific, convenient conversion for the stadia, and measure from convenient, arbitrary points on the eroded rings to make the numbers fit. And the date? This is the final nail. Yes, the Green Sahara existed in 9600 BC. But who lived there? Stone Age hunter-gatherers. Neolithic people. The people who lived there at that time were not building empires. They were not working metal. They were not organizing navies of 1,200 ships. The theory conveniently pairs the climate of 9600 BC with the technology of 1600 BC and the geology of 100 million BC. It is a fantasy, which brings us to the final, fatal flaw. The archaeology. If this was the capital of a continent-spanning, Bronze Age-style empire, it would be the single greatest archaeological site on Earth. There would be something, pottery, metal tools, the foundations of the Temple of Poseidon. The orichalcum. The docks for 1,200 ships. The graves of its millions of citizens. Archaeologists have scoured the Richat structure. And they have found nothing, that is, except for Stone Age tools. Acheulean hand axes, hundreds of thousands of years old. And Neolithic arrowheads. Exactly what we would expect to find in the Green Sahara. There is zero evidence of a city. Zero evidence of a civilization. Zero evidence of habitation on the scale Plato described. The Richat structure is not Atlantis. It is a geological marvel. A spectacular case of pareidolia, our human tendency to see patterns, to see cities, in the clouds and in the rocks. It is a beautiful, seductive, and completely false lead. So the hunt ends, once again, empty-handed. The Minoan theory is plausible, but it's not a literal match. The Atlantic theories are literal, but they are not plausible. The Richat structure is visually perfect, and scientifically impossible. This is where the search should end. But it doesn't. Because of that date. 9600 BC. For a new generation of researchers, this date is not a mistake. It is the clue. They argue that academics are wrong to dismiss it. Because 9600 BC is not an arbitrary date. It is, perhaps, the most important date in modern human prehistory. It marks the exact end of the Younger Dryas, the last ice age. It marks the moment when the ice sheets melted, catastrophically. Between 10,800 BC and 9600 BC, the planet was plunged back into a deep freeze. Then, at 9600 BC, something happened. The planet warmed dramatically, 7 degrees Celsius in a single decade. The ice dams holding back colossal glacial lakes, like Lake Agassiz in North America, broke. The result was meltwater pulse 1b. An unimaginable torrent of fresh water that dumped into the oceans, raising global sea levels by over 100 feet in a matter of a few centuries. A single day and night of violent earthquakes and floods suddenly sounds plausible. This has led to the most explosive theory of all. What if Plato's date was right? What if the cataclysm was real, a global flood event at the end of the Ice Age? What if the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is correct? The idea that a fragmented comet struck the Earth around 10,800 BC, triggering the deep freeze, and that a second impact, around 9600 BC, ended it, causing the cataclysmic floods. This is a theory of global destruction, of skies on fire, of miles-high tsunamis, of a world remade. And what if Plato's description of a Bronze Age civilization was the anachronism? What if there was an advanced civilization during the Ice Age? A mother culture, as Donnelly proposed, a civilization that was wiped out by the Younger Dryas cataclysm, and whose survivors, the gods of antiquity, spread across the world, teaching the hunter-gatherer survivors the basics of agriculture and architecture, kickstarting the civilizations of Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley. This is the theory of Graham Hancock and others. They point to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a massive, sophisticated megalithic temple complex built in 9600 BC, built by people who were supposedly just hunter-gatherers. It features 20-ton T-shaped pillars, carved with intricate reliefs of animals and symbols. This, they say, is the smoking gun. This is the work of organized, sophisticated people. This is the work of the survivors. This is the ultimate clue no one saw. That the date is the key. That Atlantis was not a Bronze Age empire, but an Ice Age one. Larger than Libya and Asia, was not a continent, but a global, maritime civilization that lived on the coastal shelves, coasts that are now 400 feet underwater. The shoal of mud left by the sinking? The silt and sediment from the greatest flood in human history. It's a breathtaking, romantic idea. The ultimate conspiracy. That all of known history is wrong, but, just like every other theory, it has a fatal flaw. There is no evidence, none. Not a single orichalcum tool. Not a single piece of Ice Age machinery. Not a single ruin of an advanced city found on the ocean floor. Göbekli Tepe is astounding, but it is not Atlantis. It shows that hunter-gatherers were far more sophisticated than we thought, that they could organize to build massive stone monuments. But it is not a city. There is no metallurgy. There is no pottery. There is no writing. There is no evidence of the massive, organized military Plato described. It's an argument from absence. We have come full circle. We are back where we started, with Plato, and perhaps this is the final, true location of Atlantis. The search for a physical, geographical Atlantis is a fool's errand. It is the search for a place that never was. It is like searching for the literal location of Hogwarts, or the historical coordinates of Middle-earth. Plato told us what it was. A story. A parable. A thought experiment. The true clue that no one saw is the one that Plato left in plain sight, that the story is not about geology, but about philosophy. It's not about a lost continent. It's about a lost way, a warning about the corrupting nature of power, a warning that was aimed directly at his own city of Athens. The genius of Plato is that he created a myth so powerful, so alluring, so detailed, that we are still talking about it 2,400 years later. He launched the greatest treasure hunt in human history, for a treasure that was never buried, and yet, the idea of Atlantis is more real than any physical location could be. The story is a vessel for a timeless, terrifying warning, a warning about hubris, a warning about technological might, a warning about imperial overreach, the story of a great civilization, convinced of its own invincibility, that is destroyed overnight by forces it cannot control. Is that a volcano? Is it a tsunami? Is it a comet? Or is it climate change? Is it nuclear war? Is it our own arrogance? The true location of Atlantis is not in the Atlantic Ocean, or the Mediterranean, or the Sahara. It is not on a map of the world. It is on a map of the human soul. It is a mirror. It is a reflection. We see in it what we want to see, a lost golden age, a warning of our own impending doom, or simply a fantastic story. We will never stop searching for Atlantis, because it is, and always has been, a story about us. In the late 16th century, the world was cracking open. The very fabric of reality, as Europe knew it, was being torn asunder. Maps were being redrawn, not in the slow, deliberate cadence of decades, but in the frantic, breathless span of single years. A new age of sail, of gunpowder, and of naked, unadulterated ambition was colliding with ancient, isolated worlds. This new world, the Americas, was a terrifying, blank space on the parchment. A place of tantalizing rumor, of mythical gold, of fountains promising eternal youth, and of shadows concealing unspeakable monsters. It was the great prize in a Cold War that was rapidly heating, a bitter ideological struggle between the global Catholic superpower of Spain and the small, defiant, Protestant island nation of England. And England was losing, desperately. Spain was an empire on which the sun never set, a colossus bestriding the globe. From the silver mines of Potosi in Bolivia, a literal mountain of silver, and the plundered gold mines of the vanquished Aztecs, a relentless river of treasure flowed into the insatiable coffers of King Philip II. This unimaginable wealth funded his armies, the unstoppable tersos, the finest fighting force in Europe, his vast fleets, and his Holy Inquisition, an instrument of terrifying doctrinal purity. Spain had claimed all of the New World, based on the Papal Bull of 1493, which had, with the stroke of a pen, divided the entire globe between Spain and Portugal. In their eyes, any other nation setting foot in the Americas was not an explorer, but a heretic, a pirate, and a trespasser deserving of immediate extermination. England, by contrast, was a young, fragile, and perpetually insecure nation. Its queen, Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, ruled with a precarious, calculating brilliance. She was a Protestant monarch in a roiling sea of Catholic enemies. She had been formally declared a heretic and excommunicated by the Pope himself, a decree that effectively made her assassination a holy act. Philip of Spain saw it as his sacred, God-given duty to depose her and return England to the Catholic fold. He funded intricate plots against her life, like the infamous Babington plot, which led directly to the execution of her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, a final, irrevocable act that sealed Philip's resolve for a full-scale invasion. Elizabeth, a master of realpolitik, knew she could not fight Spain's grand, battle-hardened armies head-on. She was a pragmatist, a survivor above all else. She had spent her own youth in the shadow of the executioner's axe, an experience that taught her the subtle, dangerous dance of power. She understood its nuances, and she knew the stark limits of her own. Her fleet was a ragtag collection of retrofitted merchant vessels and fishing boats, no match for the towering, gilded Spanish galleons. Her treasury was perpetually strained, teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, so she fought a different kind of war. A shadow war. A war of whispers and plausible deniability. She funded sea dogs, privateers, state-sponsored pirates like the audacious Sir Francis Drake, to bleed Spain dry, to intercept the treasure fleets, to raid their wealthy coastal cities like Cartagena and Santo Domingo, and to finance her kingdom with stolen gold. These men were her heroes and her deniable assets, celebrated and disavowed in the same breath. When the furious Spanish ambassador stormed into her court demanding Drake be hanged as the pirate he was, she instead knighted him on the deck of his ship, the Golden Hind, a vessel grotesquely laden with plundered Spanish treasure. But this was not a long-term strategy. It was reactive, not proactive. It was a parasite, not a foundation. England needed more. It needed a source of wealth that wasn't just plunder. It needed timber for its nascent navy. It needed exotic goods, sassafras, tobacco, furs. It needed a land of its own. It needed a strategic base in this new world, a pirate's nest from which to launch attacks on the Spanish fleets, and a New England to build a lasting empire. She turned to her most ambitious, flamboyant courtier, the quintessential Renaissance man, brilliant, arrogant, dashing, and obsessive. A poet, a soldier, a spy, an alchemist, and a ruthless capitalist. His name was Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh was the New World's greatest promoter and most fervent evangelist. He had never set foot there himself, but he saw its potential with a clarity that bordered on prophetic delusion. He was a master of propaganda, a spinner of glorious tales. He saw an England, overflowing with a poor and landless population, a direct result of the enclosure movement that turned common farmland into private sheep pastures, and he saw a vast, empty continent waiting to be filled with English souls. He saw a chance to make a colossal personal fortune, to serve his queen, and to write his name across the globe for all eternity. He obtained a royal charter, a 6-year monopoly, to discover, search, find out, and view such remote, heathen and barbarous lands. Not actually possessed of any Christian prince. Raleigh, the visionary, never set foot there himself, but in 1587, he sponsored his most ambitious mission yet. A corporation, the governor and assistants of the city of Raleigh in Virginia. This was not just an expedition. It was a business venture, a joint stock company. He recruited investors, promising them vast 40,000-acre estates. And he recruited colonists. 117 men, women, and children. They were not all grizzled adventurers. They were families. Smiths, tailors, coopers, bakers. They were the middle class, the dreamers, the desperate, seeking a social mobility utterly impossible in the rigid, hierarchical structure of Elizabethan England. They signed on to plant the first permanent English colony in North America. They were led by Governor John White, an artist, a cartographer, a man of sensitivity and observation, not a soldier. He had been to this land before and had painted its inhabitants with a stunning, humanistic eye, capturing their dignity and culture. They landed on a small, sandy, unforgiving island, a thin, vulnerable strip of land, lashed by hurricanes, surrounded by shallow, treacherous shoals that made it a death trap for deep draft ships. It was a place of buzzing insects, dense, mysterious forests, and hidden dangers. They called it Roanoke. 3 agonizing years later, John White returned. He had sailed 3,000 miles on a desperate resupply mission, a journey he had begged for, a journey delayed by a catastrophic, existential war. When his ship finally anchored at dusk, he scanned the shoreline, looking for the warm, welcoming lights of the settlement. He saw nothing but impenetrable blackness. He heard no voices on the wind, no barking dogs, no gunfire of welcome. He heard only the relentless crash of the surf and the lonely, mournful cry of the gulls. The air was heavy and silent, a palpable, terrifying emptiness. He ordered his men to play familiar English songs on a trumpet, to let the colonists know their countrymen were home. The music echoed across the dark, still water, into the silent, black woods. No answer came. At dawn, he rowed to shore. He found a scene not of violent destruction, but of profound, unsettling emptiness. The settlement was gone. The houses were gone. Not burned, not smashed in an attack. They had been carefully, methodically, deliberately dismantled. The timbers, the doors, the roof beams. All gone. The heavy equipment, the cannons, the iron shot. Gone. The small boats, the pinnaces they would have used to explore the rivers and sounds. Gone. He found chests that he had buried for safekeeping, chests containing his own precious paintings, his maps, his life's work. They had been dug up, broken open, their contents scattered and ruined by the relentless weather, a sign of looting, but by whom? There was no sign of a battle. No skeletons. No bloodstains on the ground. No unburied bones. No fresh graves. If they had been massacred, where were the 117 dead? It was as if the entire colony had been a collective dream, now vanished without a trace. The only clue was a single word, carved into a large wooden palisade post, part of a defensive fence they had built after he left, a word that has haunted history, archaeology, and the human imagination for over 400 years. Croatoan. This is the story of the lost colony of Roanoke. America's oldest and most chilling mystery, a story of 117 people who walked out of their lives, out of history, and into enduring legend. To understand how an entire colony could simply disappear, we must first understand why it was there in the first place. It was not the first attempt. It was, in fact, the third. And the location itself was a curse from the very beginning. The entire enterprise was born of Raleigh's grand vision, and that vision was built on a single, beautifully flawed report. In 1584, Raleigh sent his first mission, a reconnaissance voyage, led by Captains Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow. They were not looking for a place to build a city. They were looking for a paradise to sell to investors. They landed not at Roanoke, but further south, on the Outer Banks. And they found their paradise, or so they claimed. The soil, Barlow wrote with poetic license, was the most plentiful, sweet, fruitful and wholesome of all the world. The trees were so full of grapes, so plentiful, that I think in all the world the like abundance is not to be found. And the people, Barlow described the coastal Algonquians, the Secotans, as most gentle, loving, and faithful, void of all guile and treason, and such as live after the manner of the Golden Age. The local chief's wife, he wrote, was very sober and modest, a behavior very graceful. This was the marketing campaign. This was the sales brochure. It was exactly what Raleigh wanted and needed to hear. It was a description of Eden, a land ripe for the taking, inhabited by a gentle, noble people who would welcome them with open arms. To seal the deal, Amadas and Barlow brought two lords of the country back to England, not as prisoners, but as cultural attaches, as living proof of this new world's potential. Their names were Manteo and Wanties. In London, they were an absolute sensation. They were dressed in fine English clothes, taught English, and presented at court to the magnificent Queen Elizabeth herself. They were the living, breathing embodiment of Raleigh's dream. Raleigh assigned his top scientist, a brilliant polymath named Thomas Harriot, to study them. Harriot, a genius on par with Galileo, learned their language, and in doing so, learned about their complex politics, their spiritual beliefs, their land. He created a phonetic alphabet for their language. He learned of their gods, their social structures, and their ancient blood feuds. But Manteo and Wanties had two very different, profoundly consequential reactions to England. Manteo, who was from the Croatoan tribe, was fascinated and impressed. He saw the overwhelming power of England. The tall ships, the immense stone buildings, the gleaming metal weapons, the sheer, teeming number of people. He saw them as powerful, almost godlike beings. He decided that alliance with these people was the only viable future for his own. He became their greatest, most loyal ally. Qumran, from the Roanoke tribe, was different. He was equally intelligent, but he was deeply suspicious, his eyes seeing beyond the pageantry. He saw the dark, festering underbelly of London. He saw the filthy, disease-ridden streets, the crushing poverty, the rampant sickness. He saw the public executions at Tyburn, the debtors' prisons, a city overflowing with landless, hungry, desperate people. He saw the brutal social stratification, the beggars in the gutters while bejeweled lords passed by in carriages, and he saw their military power not as a promise of alliance, but as a clear and present threat of invasion. He saw the Tower of London, not as a palace, but as a fortress of absolute power and menace. He realized the English were not coming as friends. They were coming to take, to consume, to dominate. This fundamental split, between Mantio's trust and Qumran's burgeoning suspicion, would ultimately seal the colony's fate. Raleigh, buoyed by Barlow's glowing report and Mantio's apparent friendship, immediately funded a second mission. In 1585, a year later, he sent a fleet. This was not a colony of settlers. This was a military garrison. It was a fleet of 500 men, soldiers, sailors, and specialists, led by Raleigh's cousin, the ferocious and hot-tempered Sir Richard Grenville. The governor of the new fort would be Ralph Lane, a battle-hardened, ruthless veteran of the bloody, genocidal wars in Ireland. The mission's chief scientist, Thomas Harriot. Its artist and mapmaker, John White. Mantio and Qumran were on board, returning home. It was a disaster from the very start. Grenville's flagship, the Tiger, ran aground on the treacherous shoals, ruining most of their vital food supplies. The seed corn for planting was soaked with salt water, rendering it useless. They landed on Roanoke Island. Why Roanoke? It was a terrible, almost inexplicable choice. The inlet was too shallow for big ships. The soil was sandy and poor, not good for sustained farming. It was, however, militarily defensible, an island that could be fortified. And this was, above all, a military mission. Lane built a small, star-shaped fort. Fort Raleigh and his 100 soldiers, who were not farmers but professional fighters, immediately began to demand food from the local people. The local chief, Qumran, who ruled Roanoke, was at first accommodating, even welcoming. He remembered the Golden Age interactions with Amadas and Barlow. He saw the English as potential powerful allies against his own tribal enemies, the powerful Nusi tribe to the north. But the soldiers' demands became relentless, an endless hunger. They were soldiers. They did not work the land. They did not plant. They took. They were veterans of the brutal Irish wars, and they brought that savage, colonial mindset with them. In Ireland, the English had perfected a form of colonial warfare that involved total subjugation, the systematic burning of crops, and the extirpation of the local populace. They saw the natives not as equals, but as savages, subhumans to be dealt with through overwhelming force. Qumran had returned to his village, and his worst warnings had come true. The English were not gods. They were here to devour them. Relations soured immediately. The English, paranoid and trigger-happy, accused the natives of stealing a single silver cup. In retaliation, Sir Richard Grenville led a heavily armed detachment to a native village and burned it to the ground, destroying food stores and homes. This was the catastrophic act that destroyed any hope for the colony. Grenville then sailed back to England, promising to return with supplies. He left Ralph Lane and 100 men stranded, completely surrounded by people who now, justifiably, hated and feared them. The winter was brutal, unrelenting. The soldiers starved. They had no food of their own. Their only hope was to trade with, or more often, steal from, the natives. Thomas Harriot wrote that the soldiers were on the very brink of starvation. They were forced to eat their own hunting dogs, an act of sheer desperation. Disease, likely influenza or smallpox brought unwittingly by the English, also began to ravage the native villages, which the natives, understandably, blamed on the English and their invisible bullets, a powerful metaphor for germ warfare. Qumran, the chief, had had enough. He saw the English, weakened by hunger, as a threat that must be eliminated before they recovered. He was also a savvy political leader. He realized the English were mortal, that their guns were not thunder from the gods, and that they died from disease and hunger just as his own people did. He changed his name to Pemisipan, a name signifying his new, open hostility and his role as a strategic planner. He organized a confederation of local tribes. His plan was cunning: to cut off all food supplies, wait for the English to scatter in small, vulnerable groups in search of food, and then ambush them, one by one, annihilating them piecemeal. But Ralph Lane, the hardened veteran, found out. Matteo, loyal to the English, may have warned him. Lane did not wait to be attacked. He was a product of the Irish Wars, where the English practiced a policy of total, preemptive brutality. On June 1, 1586, Lane and his men faked a friendly visit to Wingina's capital, Decimonkpunk. When the signal was given, they opened fire in a sudden, shocking act of betrayal. Lane himself, in the chaos, cornered the chief. He beheaded Wingina Pemisipan in front of his terrified people. The garrison had declared all-out war on the very people they depended on for survival. Starving, their supplies gone, and now surrounded by a unified, enraged enemy, the colony was on the very brink of total collapse and annihilation. Then, a miracle, an act of divine providence or sheer luck. A week later, a massive fleet appeared offshore. It was Sir Francis Drake, the Queen's favorite pirate, fresh from a massive, triumphant raid on the Spanish in the Caribbean, his holds bulging with loot. Drake, seeing their desperate, emaciated state, offered them a choice. He would give them a new ship, a month's supplies, and they could stay and tough it out. Or, they could have a ride home, back to England. Lane and his men, to a man, took the ride home. They abandoned the fort, their mission, their claim. They had been in America for 10 nightmarish months. The first English colony on Roanoke was a complete, unmitigated, bloody failure. When John White, the governor of the 1587 mission, set sail, he knew all of this. He had been there. He had seen the land with his own artist's eyes. He had witnessed the violence firsthand. He had seen the starvation and the paranoia. He was an artist, a chronicler, not a soldier. He had painted the local people, their ceremonies, their families, their villages, with a deep, humanistic eye, seeing them as people, not savages. He knew Roanoke was a death trap, a cursed place. His plan was fundamentally different. He was not bringing 100 soldiers. He was bringing 117 settlers. Men, women, and children. His own pregnant daughter and her husband. They were not building a military fort. They were building a new life, a permanent community. They were bringing their furniture, their tools, their hopes, their future. They were shareholders in the city of Raleigh. Each man promised 500 acres of land. And, most importantly, they were not going to Roanoke. Raleigh had learned his lesson. The new charter was for a different place entirely. Their destination was 200 miles north, in the deep, safe, deep water harbor of the Chesapeake Bay. A place with rich, fertile soil, deep ports that could accommodate large ships, and, crucially, no history of violence with the native population. But they never made it. The mission was plagued, and arguably doomed, by a man named Simon Fernandes. A Portuguese navigator, a former pirate. He was the pilot of the fleet, and perhaps the most skilled navigator in all of England. He had also been the pilot for the disastrous 1585 mission. He was a man of dark and ambiguous loyalties, a shadowy figure. Many, including John White, suspected he was a secret agent for the Spanish, paid to sabotage the English colony. He was a privateer at heart, a man of action, and he was restless. The tedious contract to found a sleepy colony was boring, unprofitable. He wanted to hunt for Spanish treasure ships, to win glory and gold. For reasons that remain a dark, enduring mystery, Fernandes refused to sail them to the Chesapeake. He abruptly anchored at Roanoke. He claimed it was too late in the season to sail north. He claimed he had to leave immediately, to go hunt for Spanish treasure ships. He forced the 117 bewildered and terrified colonists off the ships onto the familiar, cursed sand. They were stranded in the exact place John White never wanted to be, the place he knew meant almost certain death. They found the ruins of Ralph Lane's fort. The houses were overgrown with vines. They found the bones of a single, anonymous man. After Lane had left, Sir Richard Grenville had finally returned with his promised supply ships. He found the fort abandoned. Unwilling to give up England's claim, he left a small holding party of 15 men, a skeleton crew, and sailed away. Those 15 men were never seen again. The bones they found were the only testament to their grim fate, killed, they later learned, by Cambyses' people. It was a terrible, terrifying omen of what might await them. But they were settlers, not soldiers. They began to rebuild the wrecked houses, to make a home. They had Matteo with them, their only true friend in this vast, unknown land. Matteo, who had been to England twice, was baptized and named Lord of Roanoke and Dassamonquelk by the English, the first and last native peer of the realm in the New World. This was a desperate attempt to secure an alliance, to create a legitimate government, to make Matteo their proxy ruler and protector. But Matteo's friendship and newfound title could not fully protect them. Cambyses and his warriors, now in charge after Wingina's death, were openly, vehemently hostile. They saw the English return as a second invasion, a provocation that could not be tolerated. Weeks later, one of John White's men, George Howe, was crabbing alone in the shallow waters. He was ambushed, found dead, his body bristling with 16 arrows, a message of utter contempt and hatred. The colony was in immediate, dire crisis. They were in the wrong place. They were surrounded by enemies. And their supplies, which were only meant for the voyage, were running dangerously low. Dendrochronology, the sophisticated study of tree rings, has since told us something John White couldn't have possibly known. The years 1587 to 1589 were the years of the most devastating, catastrophic drought in that region in 800 years. The corn crops would have failed utterly. The natives, starving themselves, would have had absolutely no food to spare, to trade, or to give. This environmental catastrophe, more than any human enemy, may have ultimately sealed their fate. The colonists held a desperate, fraught meeting. They decided that someone had to go back to England. Someone had to get help, to sound the alarm. Someone had to tell Sir Walter Raleigh what Fernandez had done and beg for an immediate, massive relief mission. They chose their governor, John White. White refused, vehemently. He argued that it would look like he was abandoning them, like a captain deserting his sinking ship. He had just brought his own daughter, Eleanor, and his son-in-law, Ananias Dare, to this new world. He would not leave them, his own flesh and blood, in this peril. But the colonists insisted, unanimously. They put the formal demand in writing, a signed petition. This was a legal act, a corporate decision, absolving him of his command and any potential charge of desertion. Only he, John White, had the authority, the personal connections, and the absolute trust of Raleigh to get the ships and supplies they so desperately needed. His departure was their only, slim hope for survival. He finally, tragically, heartbrokenly, agreed. Just days before he left, on August 18, 1587, his daughter Eleanor gave birth. It was a girl, the first English child born in the Americas. They named her Virginia Dare. John White, a new grandfather, held his tiny granddaughter for less than 10 days. He left his daughter, his infant granddaughter, and 115 other souls on that hostile, drought-stricken beach. He promised them he would return. He promised he would be back by the next spring, with a fleet of ships and a mountain of supplies. John White's promise would become his lifelong, waking nightmare. He arrived in England in November 1587, to a nation in a state of total, war-fueled panic. King Philip II of Spain, furious at years of English piracy and enraged by the execution of the Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots, was building the single greatest naval force in human history. The invincible Spanish Armada, Queen Elizabeth, in a desperate bid to defend her kingdom, declared a full, total embargo. No ocean-going ships were allowed to leave English ports. They were all commandeered, impressed into service for the coming war. John White was trapped, a prisoner of geopolitics. He tried, desperately, frantically. He wrote impassioned letters, he petitioned the Queen and her Privy Council, he begged his patrons. In 1588, he managed to secure 2 small, unseaworthy flyboats, and fill them with precious supplies. They were not warships. They were immediately attacked by French pirates, who swarmed the vulnerable vessels. The ships were looted, their cargo stolen. White himself was wounded in the fierce fighting. They limped back to England, defeated, humiliated, and empty-handed. Then, the Armada came, a great and mighty wind, a Protestant wind, blew, scattering the massive Spanish fleet. England was saved, by skill, luck, and weather. But the war dragged on, a long, draining conflict of attrition. A year went by. 2 years. 3. For 3 long, agonizing years, John White was a ghost in the corridors of power in London, a man possessed, a man obsessed, begging every courtier, every admiral, every merchant, for a single ship. For 3 endless years, 117 people waited on a beach 3,000 miles away, scanning the empty horizon, their fine English clothes turning to rags, their supplies dwindling to nothing, their hope fading with each passing, lonely day. Finally, in 1590, Sir Walter Raleigh, his own fortunes now waning, his favor with the Queen lost after he secretly married one of her ladies-in-waiting, could not fund a proper, dedicated rescue mission. He essentially sold his interest in the colony. He convinced a group of privateers, pirates, to take White along as a passenger. It was not a relief mission. It was a pirate fleet. Its purpose was profit, not rescue. He was, essentially, a hitchhiker on a mission of plunder. The captains were far more interested in hunting Spanish treasure ships in the Caribbean than in finding a lost colony. They spent the entire summer in the Caribbean, looting and plundering, an agonizing, heartbreaking delay for White. Finally, in August 1590, they anchored off the coast, near Roanoke. It was 3 years to the day since he had left. As they approached the island, they saw a column of smoke rising from the trees near the settlement. A good sign, they thought, a surge of wild hope. A signal fire. They rowed to shore, singing loud, familiar English songs, old English tunes, hoping for an answering shout, a wave, any sign of life. There was no answer, only the echo of their own voices. The smoke was from a random forest fire, a cruel trick of nature. When White stepped ashore, he found his worst fears realized, a scene of profound and eerie desolation. The settlement was gone. It was not destroyed by violence. It was meticulously dismantled, taken apart with deliberate purpose. All the houses were gone, vanished. The heavy equipment, the forge, the anvils, gone. The small boats, the pinnaces, gone. He found the chests that he had buried for safekeeping, chests containing his own precious paintings, his maps, his life's work as an artist. They had been dug up, brutally broken open, their precious contents scattered and ruined by the relentless sun and rain. A sign of looting, perhaps, but by whom? There was no sign of a battle, no evidence of a struggle. No bodies, no bloodstains on the ground. No unburied bones bleaching in the sun. No fresh graves. If they had been massacred, where were the 117 dead? It was as if the entire colony had been a mirage, now evaporated without a trace. The colonists, he knew, had a pre-arranged plan. He had discussed it with them before he left. If they had to leave, if they decided to move, they would carve their destination into a tree or post. If they were in distress, if they were forced to leave under duress or attack, they were to carve a Maltese cross, a specific symbol, above the name. He searched frantically, and then he found the carving on a large, prominent palisade post, part of a new, more extensive defensive fence they had built after he left, was a single, clear word, carved in capital letters, Croatoan. There was no cross. No Maltese cross. Croatoan. It was the name of Mantio's home island, 50 miles to the south, down the Outer Banks. It was the home of their only remaining allies. The carving was a message. It was not a sign of distress. It was not a cry for help. It was a sign of intent, of deliberate action. They were not captured. They were not dead. They had moved. They had gone to Croatoan. John White was filled with a wild, soaring hope. He knew where to go. He returned to the ship, and the next morning, they weighed anchor to sail south, to Croatoan. And then, the weather turned, with a savage, sudden fury. A hurricane, a classic nor'easter, slammed into the coast with unimaginable force. The fleet was battered, thrown about like toys. They lost their anchors, their lifelines to the seabed. Their cables snapped like thread. They were almost driven ashore and wrecked on the very shoals that had doomed the Tiger years before. The captains of the privateering fleet, who had only reluctantly, grudgingly participated in this rescue, refused to go any further. They had lost their anchors. The sailing season was dangerously late. They had their holds full of loot from the Caribbean. They would not risk their ships, their fortunes, or their lives for a failed colony and a broken old man. They told John White they were leaving. Immediately, they were sailing for England, for home. John White, a utterly broken, defeated man, had no choice, no power, no voice. He stood on the deck of the ship, watching the receding coast of America, the island of Croatoan, disappear into the storm and the spray. He had been within 50 miles of his family, of his daughter, of his granddaughter. He never returned. He never saw his daughter Eleanor or his granddaughter Virginia Dare again. He died a few years later, in Ireland, a forgotten man, never knowing the ultimate fate of the 117 people he had led to the New World. The colony was officially lost, but the mystery had just begun. Raleigh, his charter expired, his fortune spent, and his favor with the Queen irrevocably lost, never sent another ship. The 117 colonists were officially, and tragically, abandoned to history and to legend. For 400 years, we have been asking one haunting question: what happened to the colonists? The clues are maddeningly few. A single word: no bodies. And a 400-year silence. This silence has been filled with theories, legends, and wild speculation. Theory 1. The Spanish Massacre. This is the most logical, contemporary threat. The Spanish claimed all of North America as their own. They saw the English colony as an illegal incursion, a den of pirates that threatened their treasure routes. They had, in fact, done this before with chilling efficiency. In 1565, they had brutally massacred a French Huguenot colony at Fort Caroline, in Florida, executing nearly every man, woman, and child. They were actively, aggressively looking for Raleigh's Roanoke colony. We know from detailed Spanish archives that King Philip II was personally obsessed with finding and wiping out this heretical settlement. In 1588, a Spanish ship from St. Augustine, Florida, was specifically sent to find and destroy the colony, but by the time they finally got there, the colonists were already gone. They found only the empty ruins, the ghost town. This theory is politically plausible, but it doesn't fit the physical evidence. John White found no bodies, no skeletons, no signs of a fight, no spent shot, no broken weapons. The houses were carefully dismantled, not burned or shattered by cannon fire. And why would the Spanish, after a successful massacre, take the time to carve the word Croatoan on a post? It makes no tactical or logical sense. Theory 2. The Native Massacre. This is the most enduring and darkest theory. That Wanchese and his warriors, who had already killed George Howe, finally gathered their strength and overran the weakened colony. This theory gained significant weight 20 years later, with the founding of Jamestown. Captain John Smith, the famous, boastful leader of Jamestown, claimed he spoke to the great paramount chief Powhatan, the father of Pocahontas. Powhatan, Smith said, confessed to him in a moment of boasting. He said he had slaughtered the colonists. He claimed they had abandoned Roanoke and gone to live with the friendly Chesapeake tribe, in the area where John White had originally intended to settle. Powhatan was in the process of building his own empire, the Powhatan Confederacy. Through conquest and diplomacy, an independent, armed group of English settlers, allied with a rival tribe like the Chesapeake, would have been a direct political and military threat he had to eliminate. He claimed he had slain the men, and reserved the women and children, absorbing them into his own tribes. He even produced, Smith claimed, a few European-made objects, an iron axe, a brass mortar, to prove his story. But this too has significant problems. John Smith was a notorious self-promoter, a man who often embellished his adventures. He may have invented or exaggerated the story to impress his bosses in London, to show that he was dealing with a powerful, dangerous chieftain whom only he could manage. And again, it doesn't perfectly fit the evidence at Roanoke. No bodies were ever found. No cross was carved. Why would they meticulously dismantle their houses if they were fleeing for their lives? And why carve Croatoan, the name of their allies to the south, as a clue, if they were actually planning to go west to the Chesapeake? The massacre theory, like the Spanish theory, leaves too many perplexing questions unanswered, which brings us to Theory 3. The one that was literally carved on the post. The one John White himself believed in his heart. The one that is not a story of a sudden vanishing, but of a gradual, deliberate assimilation. The Croatoan theory. The clue was not a mystery. It was an answer, a forwarding address. John White understood its meaning instantly. They had carved no Maltese cross. This was not a distress signal. It was a message of relocation. Their situation was undoubtedly desperate. They were stranded on a hostile island. They were in the middle of a record-setting, catastrophic drought. Their only allies in the entire world were 50 miles south, on Croatoan Island, with their trusted friend Manteo. The logical, sensible, human thing to do was to go to them, to seek refuge. They would have dismantled their houses for the valuable wood, the precious nails, the reusable materials, treasures in a land without iron. They would have taken their small boats, and they would have sailed south, down the chain of islands, to join Manteo's people, the Croatoans. To survive, by any means necessary. This theory seems the most rational, the most likely, but it leaves a different, more haunting, more complex question. If they survived, what happened to them? Where did their 117 English bodies, their DNA, their culture, their language, go? For centuries, the trail went cold. The theory remained just a theory. But the answer may have been hiding in plain sight, in the swamps and communities of North Carolina. The people who live in that part of North Carolina today, the Lumbee tribe, have a powerful, persistent, and detailed oral tradition. Their history begins with their ancestors finding and taking in a group of lost, shipwrecked, or abandoned Englishmen. They tell stories of ancestors who could talk in a book, a powerful, evocative folk memory of literacy, of people who could read and write. For centuries, the Lumbee have been different, an anomaly. They are a native people, but their culture is a unique, fascinating blend. Early explorers and settlers in the 1700s, like John Lawson, were stunned and bewildered to find Lumbee individuals with distinct European features, striking blue or gray eyes, and light brown or even blonde hair. They found them living not in traditional longhouses, but in European style, two-story clapboard houses and speaking a unique form of archaic, 16th-century English, peppered with words long forgotten in Britain. Most telling of all? Their surnames. When English settlers began keeping formal records in the early 1700s, they found Lumbee families with names like Dare, Cooper, Harvey, Sampson, Wright, Taylor, names that were on the original, fateful list of the 117 lost colonists. The evidence is circumstantial, it is anecdotal, but it is deeply, profoundly compelling. It suggests that the lost colony of Roanoke was never truly lost. It simply merged. It became the Lumbee. They assimilated, they intermarried, they created a new, hybrid people. But for a long time, this was just a story. A compelling folk tale, but lacking hard proof. Until now, in the last decade, archaeology has finally, decisively provided a tangible clue. Not on Roanoke Island itself, but on Croatoan Island, which is today called Hatteras Island. Archaeologists, led by Drive Mark Horton, began a systematic dig, a scientific search for evidence. And they found exactly what they were looking for at a site known as Site X, a large, significant native village that was known to be Manteo's home. They started unearthing European objects mixed seamlessly with native artifacts. But these were not just typical trade goods, like glass beads. They were domestic items, personal possessions. A distinctive piece of a 16th-century English medicine jar, used for ointments. A snap-on's flintlock mechanism, an intricate piece of an English gun. A man's sword hilt, a personal weapon. A lead pencil, for writing or drawing. A small writing slate, for notes. A signet ring, for sealing documents. And, most importantly, numerous fragments of borderware pottery, a common, utilitarian type of pottery used by ordinary English families for cooking and eating, not the kind of high-status item typically used for trade. These objects were not just traded and discarded. They were being used, lived with, repaired, and then discarded inside a native village, at the exact stratigraphic layer corresponding to the time the colonists would have been there. This is the evidence we have waited for centuries. This is the archaeological smoking gun. The lost colony of Roanoke is not a story about a magical vanishing act. It's not a ghost story. It's a story of profound human survival. It's the story of 117 people who were abandoned by their country, by their queen, by their backers. Abandoned by their governor and grandfather. Who faced starvation, drought, and war, and who made a conscious, deliberate choice. They chose to leave their English world behind. They chose to walk 50 miles south, into the unknown. They chose to join a native tribe, to intermarry, to learn new ways, to become a new people, the first tree melting pot in American history. They didn't just survive. They assimilated. They became, in a very real sense, the first Americans. But the mystery, in its own way, still endures. Because this is not necessarily the complete, final answer. We still don't know the specific, personal stories. What was their daily life like? Did Virginia Dare, the first English child, grow up to marry a Croatoan man, her blonde hair and blue eyes becoming a family legend? Did Eleanor White Dare ever stop staring at the sea, her heart breaking, waiting for the sail of her father's ship that would never come? And what about the Powhatan Confession? It's possible, even likely, that both theories contain elements of truth. The colony, facing certain starvation, would not have necessarily stayed together as a single, large group. A group of 117 people is too large, too cumbersome, and too hungry to feed easily. It's almost certain they split up, a tragic but practical decision. A main group, perhaps 90 or 100 people, went south to Croatoan, to the safety of Manteo's people. But a smaller, more adventurous pioneer group, perhaps the single men and the soldiers, may have gone west, inland, to seek their fortune or find the Chesapeake Bay. This brings us to the final, tantalizing, game-changing clue. A map, a 16th-century map of the area, drawn by John White himself. The Virginia Pars map. For 400 years, it was held in the British Museum, studied by countless historians who saw nothing unusual. But in 2012, researchers at the First Colony Foundation, looking at the map with state-of-the-art hyperspectral imaging technology, found something astonishing. Under a small, innocuous patch of paper, which had been used to correct the coastline on the map, was a hidden symbol. A symbol for a fort, drawn in invisible ink, likely a Galatanian ink made from oak galls. It was not at Roanoke. It was not at Croatoan. It was 50 miles inland, at the confluence of two rivers, the Chowan and the Roanoke, a place the colonists, according to Harriet's notes, had discussed as a potential second colony, a place with rich soil and resources. The patch may have been added later by White or a colleague to hide this secret, fallback location from Spanish spies, should the map be captured. This hidden location is now known as Site X on the mainland. Archaeologists are digging there now, at a place called Salmon Creek. And they are finding things. The same 16th-century borderware pottery fragments. A piece of a musket barrel. A rapier hilt. A lead cloth seal from a bale of English cloth. The story is becoming clearer, more complex, and more fascinating. The colonists did not just vanish into thin air. They scattered. They split up, a diaspora of desperation. Some went south to Croatoan, to assimilation and survival, and some, it seems, went west, inland, to Site X, exactly as Powhatan had claimed to John Smith 2 decades later. It's entirely possible that this smaller, vulnerable inland group was the one Powhatan's warriors slaughtered, eliminating a political rival, while the larger, main group on Croatoan survived, their bloodline and story merging seamlessly with the people who would become the Lumbee. The lost colony of Roanoke is not a single mystery with a single solution. It is a story of 3 destinations: Roanoke, the point of departure; Croatoan, the place of assimilation; and Site X, the place of a possible, final tragedy. It is a story of a people who, faced with an impossible, existential choice, did not simply lie down and die. They adapted. They persevered. They left their clues for us, carved on a tree for all to see, and hidden on a map for only the most determined to find. And after 400 years of silence, we are finally, just now, beginning to listen to their story.